Chapter 5:26. In just a few seconds, Wu-Ming came to a small high ground where a girl with beast ears holding a bow stood there. She seemed to be admiring the moon. After Wu-Ming saw the girl with beast ears, he also let go of the unnecessary vigilance in his heart, lifted the magic version of optical camouflage, and slowly walked out of the shadows. "Since it's you, I don't think this is a trap, Atlanta." After Wu-Ming finished speaking, the girl with beast ears turned around. "This person was the famous huntress of Greece, Atlanta. You really believe me? You know I'm a huntress, Saber." Without looking back, Atlanta just closed her eyes and said in a flat tone, "Since you call me Saber, then you must have the memory of the Battle of the 14 Horsemen. I don't think you will repay kindness with ingratitude." Wu-Ming chuckled. Indeed, the only saber that Wu-Ming had ever served as was Sodric during the Battle of the 14 Horsemen, which also showed that Atlanta had that memory. And because Wu-Ming freed Black Assassin Jack the Ripper, Atlanta owed Wu-Ming a favor. It could be said that when the Argo encountered Wu-Ming before, Atlanta pretended not to know Wu-Ming and did not expose Wu-Ming's information, which was considered as returning the favor. However, it did not mean that there was no friendship between the two after the favor was returned. And now, Atlanta contacted Wu-Ming, which was the embodiment of this friendship. "If you call me over like this, won't it attract Dyson's attention? Although I don't know him, I don't think that guy is very generous." Wu-Ming walked to Atlanta's side and looked at the moon side by side. "Although Ison is indeed a useless guy, it is because of this that he will trust me completely and send me out to search the surroundings alone. However, it was also because Atlanta was suitable for investigation that Ison sent her here. So, in other words, Spartacus was really caught by you. Otherwise, why would he send Atlanta to scout for no reason?" Wu-Ming really didn't know Ison, but through historical records, in Wu-Ming's opinion, with Ison's timid temperament, he should keep all his combat power by his side. Unless there was a special situation. And Wu-Ming didn't think that Atlanta was sent by Ison. It was Demetrius who spoke to Ison, so Ison sent me out. Sure enough. Wu-Ming nodded and then continued to ask, "So, tell me the specific information about the Greek side." Immediately afterward, Atlanta briefly told Wu-Ming about the servants on the Greek side. The leader of the Greek side, or rather, the person who obtained the Holy Grail, was Ison. Therefore, the Search Argo was Ison's precious artifact. The other servants on the Greek side were Archer Atlanta, Caster Medea, Berserker Hercules, Lancer Hector, and the captive archer Zydo. That guy seemed to have told Ison that as long as he defeated the other forces and seized all 4 Holy Grails, he would be able to establish a country on this land that was separate from human history and would not be burned down by reason. Then, like a fanatic, Ison began to fight for hegemony, Atlanta said with a disdainful look on her face. He didn't know if she was mocking the Magic King or mocking Ison for believing the Magic King who had cheated him so easily. I really don't know what Ison is thinking. Back at the second singularity, he was already tricked by the Magus King. Even though it was with the help of Demetrius. Wu-Ming didn't know about this, and Atlanta didn't care whether Ison was deceived or not, so they stopped talking about this topic. "Well, I have understood the specific situation. So, why did you capture Zydo? How could you threaten Rama with this? Isn't it a bit ridiculous? Rama might be controlled by others, but it was impossible for him to completely surrender to Ison. Moreover, Zydo could take the initiative to die for the people when Rama was old. Perhaps when Ison threatened Rama with this, Zydo would choose to commit suicide. In short, it was impossible. That guy did have such an idea," Atlanta said helplessly and disdainfully. "Oh, I overestimated Ison." Wu-Ming also smiled, but his smile was quite sarcastic. "However, you can completely leave Ison's side. Why did you choose to stay? After all, there were not only Greek forces on the mainland." Wu-Ming did not think that Atlanta would stubbornly follow Ison's side. Atlanta was not a good person, but in the face of righteousness, she would not choose to follow Ison's side. "Indeed, when I was in Oceanos, I left Ison's Argo, but this time is slightly different." Atlanta shook her head. As a person who once participated in the Argo, when I was summoned by Ison using the Holy Grail, I was bound to his Argo. I can't leave this side. To put it simply, there was a master who didn't have a command seal. But this is not the whole reason. The main point is that Ison has a way to summon the demon god pillar. Wuming frowned. Shitendaji, who held the Holy Grail, also summoned the demon god pillar. Could it be that servants with a Holy Grail could summon the demon god pillar? Then, could Maeve, who held the original Holy Grail of the Singularity, also be able to, using the Holy Grail? You can use a servant's spiritual base to summon a demon god pillar, but the summoned demon god pillar is more like a possession than a summon. Atlanta continued. Possession? That is to say, the demon god pillar needs to devour a servant to be able to descend? Wuming remembered the Judge Haim who appeared when he defeated the demon god Shitendaji. He was afraid that the other party used the Judge Haim's spiritual base to summon the demon god pillar. Wuming's guess was right. Shitendaji used the unconscious Judge Haim as a medium to summon the demon god pillar. Because he used the Judge Haim's spiritual base, Shitendaji did not lose consciousness. She used the Holy Grail to split her consciousness in advance, and with the death of the main body as a trigger medium, she used the Judge Haim to summon the demon god pillar, and then fused a trace of consciousness in the Holy Grail with the demon god pillar. This was also the reason why the demon god Shitendaji made the sound of the demon god pillar and Shitendaji. Then Ison captured Cedo. This is also the reason why Ison captured Cedo. If Cedo can't make Roromo submit, then it means that he is useless. Naturally, he can use Cedo to summon the demon god pillar. Atlanta's eyes were evil, as if she was ashamed to be in the same force as Ison. This is the most important reason why I didn't break away from the Greek forces. Chapter 5:27. Compared to breaking away from Greece, isn't it more suitable for you to lurk as an undercover agent? Wuming said for Atlanta. Atlanta nodded, and then continued. Because I don't know how to be an undercover agent, I can be regarded as working for Ison wholeheartedly during this time, whether it's capturing Cedo or obeying orders to kill other servants. That was also the reason why Atlanta did not hesitate to place a noble phantasm on Wuming. Since the Argo was destroyed by your shot, Ison has been keeping the Argo in Chicago for the past few days and embedded the Holy Grail in it. With Demetrius' help, the Argo has become a grade A+ noble phantasm. It's more than enough to withstand the attack of a grade A noble phantasm. Wuming smiled when he heard this. He was afraid that Ison was frightened by Wuming's shot, so he installed the Holy Grail directly on the Argo. However, because the Holy Grail was transferred from Chicago to the Argo, the Dragonteeth soldiers could not be automatically mass-produced. These days, the Dragonteeth soldiers were made by Demetrius herself. Not only the quality but also the quantity has decreased a lot. In several battles with Rome, we can be said to be at a disadvantage. Wuming suddenly realized that the Holy Grail still had a lot of drawbacks. It could not mass-produce soldiers on the Argo. But because of this, Ison let me, Hector, and Hercules go to the battlefield together. We killed Julius Caesar and Cleopatra. At present, there are not many Roman servants left. Hearing this, Wuming's eyes lit up. This can be regarded as reducing the burden on us. Immediately afterward, Wuming told Atlanta about their plan to unite the three parties. I didn't expect you to be able to do this. Atlanta looked at Wuming deeply. Becoming the king of the Celts, destroying the Japanese forces, joining the American forces, and attacking Greece and Rome with the lone servant forces led by Master Chaldea. This really shocked Atlanta. If everything goes well, I'm afraid this singularity will be the fastest to solve among these singularities, Atlanta said thoughtfully. Atlanta herself had appeared at the second singularity before, so she naturally knew how quickly Gadazzi had saved the singularity. Based on this, he speculated that the other singularities should be similar. Indeed, counting from the time Li Xiang and the others entered this singularity, I'm afraid it hasn't even been a week. Although Wuming did not know how long it took Gadazzi to solve the previous singularities, Roman had told Wuming that it had been more than half a year since the anthropogenic fever. In other words, on average, it would take more than a month and a half to deal with the singularity. If all went well, Gadotsi would be able to resolve the singularity in less than a week. That was quite fast. While Wuming was thinking, Atalanta paused and spoke. By the way, is it okay to tell me about your chances? By the way, Demetrius may have become the master of Spartacus. You know his noble phantasm. That self-explosion is not a joke. After all, Wuming and Atalanta both had memories of the battle between the 14 knights. Naturally, they remembered the power of Spartacus' noble phantasm during the battle between the 14 knights. Are you concerned about me? Why don't you let me touch your beast ears again? Wuming smiled mischievously. Atlanta's face turned red in an instant, and she quickly left here. After Atalanta left, Wuming's mischievous smile disappeared. Looking at the gradually rising moon, Wuming always felt uneasy. At this time, Wuming found that something was wrong. The sky is not normal. Chapter 5:28. People said that waiting was the longest, but it was not the case for the servants. After putting away the communication device with Edison, Wuming went to the window and looked at the moon. At that moment, the moon had reached the western sky. It should be 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Edison told me that they have met up with Tachika and the others and set off for Rome. Wuming said to the shadow behind him. Rama and Achilles came out from the shadow. Finally, it's going to start fighting. It's very uncomfortable to be here all the time. Achilles bit the bristlegrass that he found from God knows where. I'm just as upset as you are. As long as I think about fighting side by side with the Celtic servants, my heart is extremely irritated. Rama put one hand on the eternal blade on his waist, and the other hand clenched his fist. Wuming knew what Rama meant. The enemy who imprisoned his wife was now going to rescue his wife with the enemy. Rama's heart must be quite restless. After all, Rama and Wuming had reconciled, but he did not reconcile with the other Celtic servants. It could be said that if it were not for Wuming's repeated advice and a hint of pleading, Rama, the childish king, would definitely not agree. This time, I'm giving you face. Remember this, Humph. Rama snorted and turned his head. I think you're doing this for the sake of saving your wife, of course. That sentence could only be thought. Wuming did not dare to say it out loud. Otherwise, who knew what kind of trouble this young king would cause? So, when will the Celtic servants arrive here? Achilles asked. Wuming smiled slightly. They have arrived. The moon was covered by clouds, and the earth fell into darkness. On the eastern plains outside Chicago, a large shadow moved toward Chicago with the help of the darkness. Atalanta stood on the city wall, her eyes focused. Even the moonless night could not cover the sharp eyes of the huntress. Celtic people? Atalanta said softly as if deep in thought. She then jumped, left the city wall, and returned to the city of Chicago. Without a doubt, she had gone to inform Ison. It's time for me to come out. Defending the city is my specialty. After Atalanta left, a middle-aged man carrying a javelin that was much longer than an ordinary javelin walked to the city wall. Gradually, a gust of wind blew, and the dark clouds in the sky that were blocking the moon were blown away. The moonlight illuminated the land. Countless soldiers with the same face advanced towards the city of Chicago in an orderly manner. Even Hector couldn't tell how many soldiers they had. The only two things that stood out from the rest were the 3 servants with weapons in their hands at the front of the army and the luxurious ox cart pulled by 2 divine bulls in the middle of the army. I didn't expect Queen Maeve to personally come to the battlefield. Hector scratched the back of his head, seemingly feeling helpless about the situation. Even though Greece had always been at war with Rome, it did not mean that they had never fought with the Celts. In fact, what Wuming didn't know was that whether it was the Celts, Greeks, or Romans, they had killed or injured each other. However, because it was only a battle between a single servant, the information was not circulated. Of course, from a general point of view, some information that was not so secret was still known. For example, the leader of the Celts was Maeve, because she never deliberately hid herself and even publicized it. Therefore, Hector concluded that Maeve must be sitting in the luxurious ox cart. For a woman like Maeve who thought highly of herself, it was natural for her to do such a thing. Of course, Hector didn't know Wu Ming's information. Not to mention that Wu Ming was summoned less than a week ago. Maeve didn't deliberately publicize it. Of course, this was Wu Ming's idea. Then those two spearmen must be Celtic warriors. Ah, how valiant. They didn't let a single dragon fangs go, and quickly ambushed here. I wouldn't do something like that. Hector smiled bitterly as he spoke faintly. Just like what Hector said, Greece's territory was full of dragon fang soldiers, and the Celts were able to sneak into Chicago in the middle of the night without being discovered. This was undoubtedly due to the help of the servants. I really hope it's as simple as defending the city. Uncle is very clumsy about other things. After sighing, Hector began to command the Dragonfang soldiers to prepare for the enemy's attack. Not far from Chicago, Finn waved his hand, and the entire army stopped in place as if they had received an order. This was the privilege of the Holy Grail's generals. Now the enemy must have discovered us. The next command will be handed over to the Queen, Dilmond. Finn said lightly. Yes, my lord. I will go and greet the Queen. Dilmond bowed to Finn, and then walked to the rear. Just as Dilmond said, he was ready to welcome the Queen's carriage. To be able to let the army arrive here without being discovered, your wisdom is really terrifying. Next, it's time to show my bravery. Fergus grinned. Finn had a good impression of this big guy. Well, after all, they were both Celts. Then I'll have to trouble the magic sword envoy to take the lead. In just a moment, the ox cart came from the center of the army to the front line. Ah, we're here already, Finn.
Good job.
A noblewoman's voice came from the carriage pulled by the divine ox. Our army has arrived in Chicago, and the enemy has discovered us. So, when will His Royal Highness the Holy King appear? Finn asked politely. Your Holy King is on the other side of the city. I can feel it. In the carriage, Maeve took off her white silk gloves and looked at the bright red dragon-like pattern on the back of her hand formed by 3 command seals and smiled. Then, let's have Fergus break the city gate. No problem, right? Maeve said to Fergus outside the carriage. Of course no problem. How can a Celtic man say no? After saying that, Fergus walked forward with the magic sword spiral sword on his shoulder. After the Holy Grail's treatment, Fergus had completely recovered, and now he was full of energy. On the city wall, Hector looked at the man walking forward with a magic sword. He had already guessed what he was going to do. He's going to attack the city with a noble artifact. What a headache. Then, when Hector noticed that Fergus' noble artifact was getting brighter and the magic power was getting thicker, Hector retreated. Uncle, you can't stop it. This is already a noble artifact that's comparable to a city's noble artifact. Let's escape first. Then, a rainbow-colored light exploded after Hector left the city wall. Chapter 5:29. All right, I feel like I'm full of energy today. I'm sure you'll be satisfied with this shot. Fergus raised his neon sword and laughed. One had to know that the A and plus in A plus were not eye-catching individually, but when they were combined, it was no joke. Then hurry up. If it wasn't for your relic, I would have asked you to leave earlier. Maeve's impatient voice came from the carriage. Naturally, by leaving the stage, he meant that he had died. Also, although I don't mind you taking advantage of me verbally, I would be happy to see little Sai kill you. Oh, my apologies, Your Majesty. Don't worry, I'm sure His Majesty will be satisfied with this shot. I hope so. Maeve's lazy voice sounded. The neon sword in Fergus's hand began to glow. Fergus stabbed the neon sword into the ground. Calibog. In an instant, a rainbow-colored light extended from the neon sword to the city walls of Chicago.
Boom.
In an instant, a rainbow light burst out of the ground and blasted the city walls of Chicago. Countless Dragonfang soldiers were directly destroyed and turned into dust. Those Dragonfang soldiers that were lucky enough not to be turned into dust were also scattered into small pieces of bone. Ahahaha! This is truly spectacular. Fergus laughed heartily as he raised the rainbow sword. It had to be said that Fergus was really full of energy. After releasing the relic that doubled his power, he was still in high spirits. Finn and Dilmad watched this scene calmly. After all, this scene was nothing to them. Maeve, who was sitting in her beloved chariot, nodded in satisfaction. Then she gave an order. Everyone, attack. At this moment, an irrational roar was heard. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. On the west side of Chicago, which was the opposite side of Maeve's army, Wuming, Rama, and Achilles arrived. When the three of them arrived, they saw the explosion on the east side of Chicago. That's the demonic sword envoy's precious artifact, Rama said. The person who understands a person the best is not his friend, but his opponent. Back then, Rama had fought Fergus to the death for the sake of Cedo. Naturally, he knew about Fergus' noble artifact. That should be the case. Fergus' noble artifact was still vivid in Rama's mind. To be honest, I originally wanted to end that guy directly. At this moment, Wuming spoke. Both Rama and Achilles looked over. If there are no restrictions, he will do as he pleases. For a king, this kind of teammate is very annoying. Wuming smiled coldly. At this moment, Rama and Achilles finally felt the pressure brought about by Wuming. No matter how kind this guy was, he was still a berserker. No matter how close he was to the people, he was still a king. All in all, Wuming was not a kind man. He would not hesitate to do things that would bring him enough benefits. However, Wuming still had his own bottom line. As the origin dragon, Wuming would definitely become 10,000 times more noble than Gaia Alea in the future. He was destined to never be the same as an ordinary person, which was why he treated everything with reason. That was why people often said that the heavens were heartless. Moreover, have you ever seen Wuming hesitate or worry when he killed someone? Although it was a pity, why would a human feel sad when he crushed an ant to death? That was the reality. Take Nazalik, for example. The people in it were all demons. If it was not for Wuming deliberately suppressing them, they would have been destroyed. However, Wuming would still not do anything to them. Firstly, they were Wuming's subordinates. Wuming had mistakenly entered and became the supreme king. Therefore, he had to be responsible. Secondly, if there was good, there would be evil. Wuming would not purposely punish the evil. Cough, cough. However, if they provoked Wuming, Wuming would not mind getting rid of the weeds. Just like Darius, who wanted to capture Mayu. Other than that, Wuming was more fond of humans. Because Wuming was just adopted by humans, he was a human for a period of time. Therefore, he was more fond of humans, especially those who were considered good by Wuming. If he had the ability, Wuming would definitely help. Rick was a good example. Wuming specially went to Rick's world and helped the humans to turn the situation around. If possible, Wuming still liked to stay with humans, because the possibilities and emotions of humans made Wuming very happy. And Wuming wanted to kill Fergus. Well, regarding this point, Wuming only wanted to kill Fergus because he had flirted with Maeve before. But no matter what, he is still my subordinate. It is better to keep him alive. Just like that, the topic ended. Let's go. Maeve has already started. We can't fall behind. Saying that, the three of them walked towards the west wall of Chicago. Wuming started to move. On Maeve's side, there was a small problem. Hercules let out a confused roar as he swung his axe and sword at Fergus. Bang! The ground that was hit by Hercules cracked. As for Fergus, he naturally dodged this attack. Hey, why are you attacking me directly? You think too highly of me. Although Fergus was still running his mouth, his expression had become serious. Fergus was also holding the neon sword with both hands. Dilmad, be careful. This big guy is not to be trifled with. Finn held his spear and looked warily at Hercules, who had pulled out his axe and sword from the ground. Yes, my lord. Dilmad also raised his red and yellow spears and stood beside Finn. My brave warriors. Maeve didn't even walk out of the carriage. With just one sentence, countless Wuming-faced soldiers rushed towards Hercules. However, even if they were strengthened by the Holy Grail, the small fries were still small fries. For a great hero like Hercules, they were basically useless. Hercules roared at the sky. Even if he didn't have magic to release this skill, the roar mixed with magic alone was enough to shock the nearby soldiers to death. Then, Hercules rushed into the crowd of soldiers and began a massacre. At this moment, Hercules could only be described with 4 words: unparalleled mowing. Ha! Accompanied by a roar, a drill-like spiral sword attacked Hercules from behind. Clang! Hercules easily blocked Fergus' attack with his axe and sword and slapped Fergus away. With the mind's eye skill, Hercules naturally wouldn't be ambushed successfully. This is a little tricky. Fergus stabilized himself as he flew away and broke out in cold sweat. When Fergus was sent flying, Finn and Dilmund also rushed forward. With the 2 of them together and their flexibility as spearmen, they could slightly restrain Hercules. However, they still couldn't cause much damage to Hercules. Let's release the noble artifact again. With that, Fergus raised his magic sword. However, at this moment, a rather deranged voice was heard. Ahahaha, oppressor, oppressor. Chapter 530. In the west of Chicago, because Maeve was attracting attention in the east of Chicago, Wooming's side was relatively smooth. Nay dash, Achilles stopped his chariot, and the 3 immortal horses that pulled the chariot snorted. On the city wall, there was no one. All of them were Dragon Fang soldiers. Now, these Dragon Fang soldiers had all fallen to the ground and turned into ashes. Even my chariot can't stop them. Sure enough, the small fries are not interesting. There was no doubt that these were all done by Achilles, who had just stopped the chariot. Besides, Achilles also descended as a rider. Achilles' chariot was still too strong for these Dragon Fang soldiers, or rather, the Dragon Fang soldiers were too weak. What's more, these Dragon Fang soldiers were likely to be made by Demetrius, not the enhanced version of the Dragon Fang soldiers mass-produced by the Holy Grail. Immediately afterward, Wooming and Rama got off the chariot. The 2 finally experienced the thrill of racing an ancient chariot. At this time, an arrow emitting turquoise magic power shot over. Bang dash, Rama held the indestructible blade and deflected the arrow with A-level strength. The 3 of them looked at the roof of the house not far away, and Atalanta was aiming her bow here. That is, big sister. Achilles' expression darkened. After all, when he was in the 14th Rider, he had a good relationship with Atalanta, and Achilles didn't really want to attack Atalanta. Oh, really? Why are there so many people tonight? I don't have the energy to entertain you all. A voice that was more boring than Roman came. Hector, carrying his long javelin, appeared from the shadows of the city. Hector? This was Achilles' second surprise after Atalanta. He didn't expect it to be someone related to him. In the famous Trojan War, Hector's defense was invincible, and the enemy was defeated. The Trojan side was not far from victory. After that, Achilles went to the battlefield to fight Hector one-on-one. Although Hector broke his immortality, Hector still lost. As a result, the Trojan side gradually lost. It could be said that if there was no Achilles, Hector would not die, and he would not fall into the Trojan horse trap, and the Trojan side would probably win. But there were no ifs, and now, the 2 old rivals of the Trojan War were reunited here. Isn't this Achilles? I didn't think that we would become enemies again. Sure enough, the Holy Grail is really a magical thing. Hector didn't think that he would be able to see Achilles, and he was also shocked. I'll deal with this guy. Achilles said to Wooming and Rama Rider, riding on his meteor chariot. Said chariot, but said chariot, 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 he said chariot, and said he said oh. Said, although said, of said, said. Although Hector did not think that Atalanta could defeat the remaining two servants, he did not think that she would be able to defeat them. In Hector's opinion, the remaining two servants were not weaker than Achilles. However, Archer Atalanta just nodded indifferently and did not say anything. After Hector left, Rama pointed the undying blade at Atalanta. "Then, let me deal with this archer," Romo said confidently. Wuming knew that after the mana crystal healed Rama, a huge amount of mana was still stored in Rama's body. Just like how Fergus had an excess of energy after being healed by the Holy Grail, Rama was the same now. Then, under Rama's eager expression, Atalanta put down the bow. "Sarand, Ison is preparing to escape." Then, two gasps of surprise came from Wuming and Romo. "Huh!"
Sigh.
The southern city of the Missouri River Valley, Alexandria, camp of the Roman forces. Romulus looked at the Roman soldiers who were fighting against the incoming mechanical troops with a serious face and did not say anything. "Lord God." A blonde girl in a white wedding dress walked to Romulus' side. "It seems that the masters of Chaldea have joined forces with the native forces of the United States. Very good. In this way, I, Rome, will be protected." Romulus nodded and said excitedly. However, Nero did not understand what his god was talking about. "My sons, Caesar, Caligula, have left. Now all of our servants, Rome, have left," Romulus said to the pure bride, who asked Rome to summon emperors this time. How mysterious would the emperors be? It was expected that they would leave. "I will protect Rome until I die," the girl said to the god ancestor in a tone of farewell. "My son, if I, Rome, also leave, then destroy the Holy Grail," Romulus said. "But, God, isn't that the existence that is suppressing her? If we destroy the Holy Grail, won't she be released?" The girl said worriedly. "Compared to becoming the demon god pillar, I, Rome, think that we should choose to release her." As he said that, Romulus put his hand on the girl's head. "If Rome, is gone, there is no need to stop her. Moreover, she is also on our side, my son Nero." I understand, Lord God." Then they realized that instead of attacking, the mechanical troops seemed to be trapping them here. "It seems that something we don't know has happened, my son." "My son, welcome them in." In the west of Chicago, the battle between Achilles and Hector caused a lot of magic to explode. It was as bright as the light in the night. However, Wuming and Romulus did not pay attention to that. "In short, that archer is actually on our side." Romulus looked at Atalanta, who left, and asked Wuming rather unhappily. He wanted to fight for a long time. In the end, he finally met an enemy that he thought he could fight, but it turned out to be a spy on his side. In short, it's a good thing to subdue the enemy without fighting. Wuming smiled and patted Romulus on the shoulder, indicating that he was more open-minded. "Humph. Of course, I understand that," Romulus said unhappily. "Then next we need to wait, right?" Wuming walked to the edge of the city wall and said jokingly, "We can also watch Achilles fight Hector to relieve our boredom." Wuming showed a mischievous smile. Romulus was speechless. Chapter 531. Ahaha! Oppressor! Spartacus laughed wildly and used his seemingly ordinary iron sword to madly charge into the crowd of soldiers. At this moment, Maeve had already retreated to the back of the soldiers, or it should be said that the soldiers were constantly moving forward. Maeve, who hadn't moved, fell behind the soldiers. If one paid close attention, they would discover that Spartacus was advancing towards Maeve. If Wuming was here, it wouldn't be strange. After all, Spartacus liked to attack the so-called oppressors that he spoke of the most. In other words, it was normal for him to attack Maeve. "I can't let you pass, Berserker." At this moment, a tall man with a spiral sword stood in front of Spartacus. It was Fergus, who had been sent flying by Hercules. Because Finn and Dilmund had gone to restrain Hercules, Fergus was the only one facing this mad dog. Why didn't Maeve make a move? If the Emperor had to make a move, then what was the use of a general? "Are you also an oppressor?" "Ahahaha, Oppressor, give me more oppression." Spartacus laughed loudly, no longer caring about the other soldiers, and charged towards Fergus. Although it was very short, Fergus had been a king before, so it wasn't strange that he could attract Fergus' attention. Clink! The magic sword and the ordinary iron sword collided, producing an ear-piercing sound. It was hard to imagine that Spartacus's ordinary iron sword could not break after colliding with a magic sword. Ahahaha! Ahahaha! Spartacus was like a mad dog as he punched Fergus, without any pattern. Fergus was a Celtic warrior, a member of the Red Branch Knights, and also wielded a magic sword. Naturally, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage in a fight against the leader of the rebels, Spartacus. If one only looked at his appearance, Spartacus was about to be killed by Fergus. However, Fergus discovered that even if Spartacus' body was seriously injured, this berserker was getting more spirited as he fought. No, it should be said that the more injured he gets, the more spirited he gets. TSK, I hate this kind of guy with super high durability. Fergus was rather unhappy. Spartacus' body was already injured. His right arm was almost detached from his body, and there was a big hole in his abdomen and heart by the neon sword. There were many half-meter-long wounds on his body, and even half of his head was smashed in. The wounds on Spartacus' head and heart were the wounds. When Fergus saw that Spartacus was getting more spirited, he directly attacked these two places. However, Fergus didn't affect Spartacus. Fergus even noticed that Spartacus's wounds were healing, and Spartacus mutated. Spartacus, whose body had begun to change, gradually blocked Fergus' attacks and began to counterattack. Berserker can't be killed. Fergus was. Fergus took a few steps back and was ready to use his noble relic to kill Berserker in one go. Ahaha! Ahaha! Oppressor! Come! Give me even more pressure. However, Spartacus didn't give Fergus a chance. He was really like a mad dog, entangling with Fergus. In the face of a berserker like Spartacus, who had so many crazy skills, pure magic and physical attacks were basically useless against Spartacus. This was all thanks to Spartacus' noble phantasm and skills. The glory of being abused. B+, when the magician healed Spartacus, the amount of magic consumed was a quarter of the original amount. The more serious the attack, the more spirited Spartacus was until he brought out all his hidden strength. After a certain period of time, the injuries would be gradually healed. Unyielding will. No matter what kind of pain and despair he faced, he would not give in. An extremely strong will could obtain physical and mental endurance. Roar of the defective beast. Crying warmonger. A part of the damage received from the enemy can be converted into magic and stored in the body. The efficiency of the conversion of magic will increase as Spartacus' physical strength decreases. The magic accumulated in the body can be used to enhance Spartacus' ability. It could be said that Spartacus was on the same level as Hercules in terms of tenacity. Of course, it was only in terms of tenacity. Currently, there were only two ways to deal with Spartacus. The first way was to wait for Spartacus' noble phantasm to activate and self-destruct. The second method was to use the instant kill ability of the demon eyes of death perception to directly ignore everything and kill Spartacus. Of course, if one had the ability to directly destroy Spartacus' body, it could be said that he was killed instantly. Currently, Spartacus had not accumulated enough magic to self-destruct. However, Fergus had a noble phantasm that was enough to destroy 3 mountains. However, Fergus did not know about this. Moreover, his noble phantasm might not be able to kill Spartacus instantly. Fergus wanted to release his noble phantasm, but at the moment, Fergus was trapped by Spartacus, who was changing rapidly. In terms of attributes, other than Spartacus' durability being higher than Fergus, the rest of Spartacus' ability points were either the same or lower than Fergus. Coincidentally, Spartacus' agility was 2 levels lower than Fergus. Fergus also discovered this in the following battle with Spartacus. Therefore, after a few rounds of fighting with Spartacus, he used his skills to trip Spartacus and get behind him. Then, he took the opportunity to distance himself from Spartacus. Oppressor? Spartacus got up from the ground and shook his head. He then found Fergus, who was not far behind him. Then, Spartacus excitedly raised his iron sword and rushed towards Fergus. Spiral, get ready. Fergus calmly raised his neon sword as he looked at Spartacus, who was running towards him. Fergus shook his head helplessly as he looked at Spartacus, who was 5 meters tall and had accumulated mana due to his injuries. It's my misfortune to be able to meet you. Indeed, as an enemy, Spartacus was an incomparable headache because he couldn't be killed by ordinary means. Well, even as an ally, he was a headache. All in all, Fergus had had enough. He wanted to end this berserker completely. Fergus focused all his mana into the neon sword and even began to overdraw his spiritual base. After all, Fergus' mana was E. Fergus was afraid that he could not kill this thing. Taste the real neon sword. Just like Ibaraki Duji's noble phantasm, the neon sword emitted its last colorful light. Even Hercules, Finn, and Dilmun stopped fighting. Maeve, who was at the back of the army, did the same. The 4 of them turned their attention to Fergus and Spartacus. Aha! Oppressor, oh! The light covered the ground. Chapter 532. Boom! The sound of a nuclear explosion came from the east of Chicago, and the storm raged. Wu-ming and Rama both stabilized their bodies and squinted at the scene filled with sand and dust. After Atlanta left, Wu-ming and Rama did not really go to watch the classic duel between Achilles and Hector. Instead, they ran along the edge of Chicago toward the Celtic army in the east of the city. In the end, before they could even reach the Celtic army, a violent explosion occurred. The power of the explosion was so great that it even completely destroyed the east wall of Chicago, giving people the feeling that there were no walls in the east of Chicago. Of course, whether it was Denver, Alexandria, or Chicago, there were no such things like ancient walls. All of them were built by various forces during this period of time. Wu-ming and Rama looked at each other, and the two quickly ran forward. Because of the strong hurricane caused by the big explosion, there was basically no sand and dust around, so the scene could be said to be clear to Wu-ming and Rama at a glance. In front of the two of them was a huge crater of nearly 100 square kilometers, but because it was too big, they could only estimate, but it was definitely more than 50 square kilometers. The depth of the crater was needless to say. The distance between the deepest part of the crater and the ground was about 50 meters, and maybe it was even deeper. Wu-ming thought that if such a crater fell on Earth, humans would probably end up like the dinosaurs. The ground on the edge of the crater was unusually smooth, and there were no impurities. It was completely the product of the downward compression of the soil by the explosion. In the center of the crater, there was a lake full of water, and the lake water was still rising. East of Chicago was Lake Michigan. At this moment, such a big explosion directly connected this huge crater to Lake Michigan. There were no traces of soldiers or servants on the scene, and Wu-ming's perception was temporarily disabled. There was no doubt that the army brought by Maeve was directly blown into ashes by the explosion. As for the servants who were fighting here, they were probably in danger. Wu-ming frowned.
He was a little worried about Maeve.
Even if the servants were killed, they would just retreat to the martyr's palace. However, Wu-ming was still worried. Because the air here was full of chaotic magic, Wu-ming's perception was also disturbed by these chaotic magic. It was not that he could not perceive anything, but the difficulty of perception was greatly increased. This terrible explosion, which powerful servant's noble phantasm is it? Rama said with lingering fear. Even he did not have the confidence to say that he could survive the explosion that covered an area of nearly 100 square kilometers. After all, a servant was much stronger than an ordinary person, but without a defensive noble phantasm or skills, they would also directly leave. If he did not have the golden armor, he would have to use of his noble phantasm. He would have to use his noble phantasm to survive. Of course, if Rama released his noble phantasm, he would be able to survive. Even if he did not die, he would die. He would be dead, at least he would be dead. All in all, if that was really the case, Rama would definitely not feel good. After Rama finished speaking, Wu-ming sighed. I'm afraid that except for Maeve, all the servants present have left. After all, this explosion was in the Celtic army. Not to mention that the army was completely wiped out. Wu-ming still could not find any servants. As for why Wu-ming knew that Maeve was fine, it was because Wu-ming was worried about her. Wu-ming's master was Maeve, so naturally, there was a contractual connection between them. Wu-ming naturally knew whether Maeve had left or not. Previously, by relying on this connection, Wu-ming knew that Maeve had come to Chicago. Suddenly, Rama said, "What is that?" Rama pointed to the lake below the giant pit that was still rising. Wu-ming followed Rama's gaze. In the middle of the lake, a large rock that was emitting red light floated up. However, Wu-ming always felt that the stone with red light was so familiar. Oh my God, that was not a stone with red light. It was clearly Hercules who was activating the 12 trials, God Hand. It was said that Spartacus was difficult to deal with, but compared to Hercules, it was simply insignificant. Hercules' 12 trials, God Hand, could be said to be a real resurrection. Even if his head was chopped off, or his whole body was crushed, as long as the noble phantasm was activated, Hercules' whole body would be like steel that was just out of the furnace, emitting red light, and began to reconstruct his body. Not to mention, it would also increase the resistance of the cause of death. Hercules was the real difficult to deal with. Wu-ming fought for a whole day to retrieve Hercules' Berserker class card. In Winterwood City, the new Seven Knights and the Dark King Arthur had to work together to kill Hercules. From this, one could see how tenacious Hercules was. Fortunately, Hercules was a berserker. Otherwise, if Hercules knew how to use his brain, it would be a disaster. In an instant, Wu-ming flew up and rushed to Hercules, who was still recovering his body. Rama did not stop Wu-ming. In Rama's opinion, facing an enemy, one should be ruthless, not to mention that this was a servant from Greece. However, this would disappoint Rama. Wu-ming would not waste his effort to kill Hercules. Not to mention how difficult it was to kill him. Moreover, now is not the time to waste on him. The reason why Wu-ming rushed to Hercules was to trap him. Wu-ming arrived above Hercules. Along with the crisp sound of chains, several pseudo-heavenly locks were taken out by Wu-ming and tied to Hercules. Heavenly locks targeted servants with divinity, and Hercules' divinity was as high as a class. However, Wu-ming was very clear about one thing. Even if heavenly locks could only trap Hercules for a short time, heavenly locks were only able to suppress Hercules. The stronger the divinity, the tighter the heavenly locks would be. However, Hercules' strength was as high as A+. In Wu-ming's opinion, Hercules was fully capable of breaking the heavenly locks. In that case, let alone these pseudo-heavenly locks. However, Wu-ming was only holding on to the idea of stalling for time. Subsequently, Wu-ming took out a lot of pseudo-heavenly locks that were stored in his noble phantasm. He only left one pseudo-heavenly lock and tied the rest to Hercules. In this case, it would take a long time to use only his strength. Wu-ming looked at the chain mummy in front of him and nodded, as if he was very satisfied with his work of art. Subsequently, Wu-ming buried Hercules in a huge pit, which could be said to be the bottom of the lake. After that, Wu-ming and Rama looked for Maeve. Well, first of all, they had to ignore Rama's gaze. Chapter 5:33. Wu-ming searched along the edge of the crater and soon found Maeve. After all, Wu-ming could feel from the contract that Maeve was not hurt at all. That meant that she was not in the range of the explosion just now. At the very least, she was not hurt. Naturally, she was outside the crater. With Wu-ming and Rama's acceleration, it was easy for them to go from the edge of the crater to the other side. It only took them a few minutes. At that moment, the celestial bowl that was pulling Maeve's carriage had fallen to the ground. It seemed that it was affected by the explosion. The carriage that was originally gorgeous and dignified had become a little tattered. However, at least it did not seem to be damaged internally. Rama came to the front of the celestial bowl and squatted down to check on the two celestial bowls. Wu-ming was slightly stunned when he saw that. Then he recalled something. It seemed like Rama was quite a caring big boy. At that moment, Maeve suddenly flew out of the carriage. That's right. She flew out and landed in Wuming's arms. Wuming wondered how Maeve could fly into Wuming's arms in a straight line. Wouldn't you fall because of gravity?
Newton was about to cry.
In short, Wuming hugged Maeve, who was flying toward him. Little Sai, you're finally here. You almost couldn't see me. Maeve looked at Wuming pitifully. Of course, if Maeve changed her smile into a cry, the effect would be better. This must be your wife, Celander. I'm really envious. Romo stood up and looked at the couple who were hugging each other lovingly. He was filled with emotion. Rama was naturally envious of the couple who could be together. It was unlike him and Sito, who could not see each other because of the curse. However, Wuming was very helpless. How could you tell that this was a loving hug? It was obviously my Fu who suddenly flew out, and I subconsciously hugged her, okay? However, since he had accepted Maeve, a hug was nothing. Asterisk cough cough asterisk. Speaking of which, Maeve, what's going on here? Wuming asked. On the other hand, Rama was all ears. After all, such a huge explosion was very attractive. This is what happened. Maeve began to tell the story. After Fergus broke the city gate, Hector left while Hercules appeared. Finn and Dilmaud held Hercules back. However, Spartacus appeared and Fergus and Spartacus went against each other. Maeve, of course, was to watch the battle. Following that, there was no progress in the battle between Hercules, Finn, and Dilmaud. It was just a back-and-forth exchange of blows. Although Finn and Dilmaud couldn't defeat Hercules in a one-on-one fight, the two of them were able to fight Hercules to a draw for the time being. As for the battle between Fergus and Spartacus, it was a one-sided battle. Wuming felt that something was wrong. He knew the effect of Spartacus' noble phantasm. Soon after, Fergus saw that Spartacus was getting more and more spirited as he fought. Spartacus had transformed into a 5-meter-tall monster. Moreover, he was still transforming into a monster. Fergus decided to activate his relic immediately. Then, Spartacus exploded. Wuming shook his head bitterly. As expected, nothing good ever came out of this guy's capture. Rama tilted his head awkwardly. It was his fault. However, the young Rama king would never admit his mistake. Asterisk cough cough asterisk. As Maeve was the furthest away and had the protection of the ox cart, she was not hurt. However, the two divine bulls were in trouble. These two divine bulls were not Achilles' immortal horses. Now, all their bones were broken, and they were about to leave the stage. Fortunately, it was a noble phantasm, so they did not have to worry too much about it. After Wuming and Rama arrived, Maeve removed the noble phantasm. The divine bulls and the ox cart turned into mana particles and disappeared. Is Berserker's noble phantasm that powerful? Rama asked. It was normal for a powerful heroic spirit to have a powerful noble phantasm. However, Spartacus was just a rebellious gladiator. To put it bluntly, he was just a rebellious slave. Moreover, he was a slave who did not succeed in his rebellion and was quickly executed. No matter how one looked at it, such a person should not have such a powerful noble phantasm. He might be an exception. However, I've seen his noble phantasm before. Even if it exploded, it wouldn't be this powerful. Wuming put Maeve down from his arms, ignoring her dissatisfied expression. Then, Wuming looked at the lake behind him that was about to be filled. However, with Master's 3 command incantations and Fergus' noble artifact charging Spartacus, it's not hard to imagine how much damage it could cause. Although almost 100 square kilometers was huge, if Karna and Wuming were to fight, thousands of square kilometers of land could be affected. That was also the reason why Wuming had asked Karna and Zhou to fight in the northwest part of the Cordillera Mountains. There were fewer people there, and it was far away from the battlefield. Otherwise, they would be affected by the battle. Command spells? Noble phantasm charging. Rama and Maeve repeated Wuming's words. That's right. Wuming nodded his head. Spartacus' noble phantasm, Crashing Warmonger, is a permanent noble phantasm. It can convert the damage it receives into mana and store it in its body. It can increase its ability value and change its body. Finally, when the mana is full, It will self-destruct and launch a destructive impact. After explaining, Wuming paused and thought for a while. I think Demetrius must have used the command incantation to give the command to unleash the greatest power of the noble phantasm 3 times. It strengthened Spartacus' noble phantasm. In addition to Fergus' continuous attacks and the overcharging of Spartacus' noble phantasm, it caused Spartacus to reach the critical point and self-destruct before it could transform into a monster. Rama and Maeve thought for a while and realized that this was the most suitable explanation for the current situation. However, I think Fergus' noble phantasm had a huge impact on the situation here. Maeve smiled. What do you mean? Wuming asked. Maeve then told Wuming about the neon sword that seemed to have been infused with all its power. Does that mean it's the same as Ibaraki Duji? Wuming touched his chin. It seems like they've all left the battlefield. Needless to say, Fergus was the closest to Spartacus and was designated to leave the battlefield. As for Finn, Dilmund, and even Hercules, they had spent a lot of time repairing their bodies. It was likely that the 2 of them had also been forced out of the battlefield during the explosion. Don't we need to care about Hercules? Rama asked. He knew that Wuming did not kill Hercules. He only tied Hercules up and buried him. Don't worry about that guy for now. He's no different from leaving the battlefield. Wuming waved his hand. After all, it was not easy for Hercules to break free from the pseudo-skylock that was almost the same as the real skylock. Just when Wuming was about to check on Achilles, a dark purple ripple suddenly appeared. Chapter 534. The portal has been activated? Wuming was shocked. That's right, this was Wuming's portal. There's no time to explain.
Come in quickly,
Wuming said as he rushed into the portal. That's right, he rushed in. It was obvious how anxious Wuming was. Romo seemed to have thought of something and quickly rushed in as well. Maeve looked at the 2 of them rushing in. She blinked her eyes and walked in gracefully. Then, the portal closed. After passing through the portal and arriving on the other side, Maeve found herself in the belly of a ship. Then, a rather strange scene appeared before Maeve's eyes. Wuming was holding the Holy Grail in one hand and a spear in the other. He placed the spear on the neck of a yellow-haired guy whose face was pale with fright. Next to the yellow-haired guy was a girl with pinkish-purple hair. She was holding a magic wand with a nervous expression. The beast-eared girl with green hair was aiming an arrow at the girl's head. If the girl with the magic wand made any strange movements, Maeve believed that the beast-eared girl's arrow would definitely pierce through her head. Behind Wuming was Romo. However, at this moment, Romo was holding a girl who looked almost exactly like him. Rama's face was filled with nervousness as he kept calling out names like Cedo, Cedo. However, from the looks of it, Romo seemed to be unable to see the girl at all. He was like a blind person who could only rely on touch. However, from the looks of it, there seemed to be a problem with Romo's perception. Although on the surface, Romo could accurately touch Cedo, at this moment, Romo gave off the feeling that he was touching air. As for the girl who seemed to be called Cedo, she was already unconscious. This made my Fu daydream. If that girl was me, would Xiao Sai be as anxious as she is? This was a girl's heart. However, Wuming was not paying attention to Maeve at the moment and did not know what she was thinking. Wuming was only paying attention to the yellow-haired guy. In any case, you're someone who entered the martyr's palace. Can't you have a little backbone? With that, Wuming rubbed the tip of his spear on Isen's neck. However, Wuming's result was Isen's howl. Squeak, squeak. Isen's face turned pale, and his hands were still trembling. Don't kill me, Isen said in a trembling voice. Looking at Isen in such a state, Medea, or Lily looked at Isen with worry and disappointment. Sir Isen, after seeing such a traitorous witch, Wuming finally understood why Medea, who was abandoned by Isen, would choose to follow him again. Because Medea was in the form of a girl's dream of a girl. Wuming shook his head. A guy like that was not worth his time. However, Wuming still did not lower the tip of his spear from Isen's neck. Then, Wuming turned to look at Rama. Rama, Can't you sense Sito? Wuming frowned. Although he had learned about the so-called curse from Rama, he did not expect the curse to be so powerful. Now, not to mention not being able to see, even the contact between the two of them, and even their own perception had become erroneous. This curse of never being together was not just for show. He did not know how a female monkey could place such a curse on Rama and Sito. That's right. Even if Sito and I were to hug each other, we would not be able to see or sense each other. Rama no longer referred to himself as you. At this moment, Rama was like a person who is chasing after hope. In the end, he realized that the hope was despair. Once Sito and I get too close, one of our powers and presence will gradually fade until they leave. Tears rolled down Rama's cheeks. As for which party would disappear, there was no doubt that it would be the weaker party. Wuming recalled the scene when he came back through the portal released by Atlanta. At that time, Sito was not restrained by any chains. However, there was no guarantee that Medea's magic did not restrict her. However, even so, Sito could not stand up at that time as if she was severely injured. At that time, Wuming sensed that Sito's magic power was insufficient, or rather, it was severely lacking. At this moment, looking at the many injuries on Sito's body, as well as the faintly discernible signs of his spirit base disappearing, how could Wuming not know what was going on? From being imprisoned on Alcatraz Island to this Argo, until now, Sito had been in a state of abuse. That we did not do anything to Miss Sito. Please believe us. Lord Ison only wanted to use Miss Sito as a hostage, Medea said weakly. If that was the case, the injuries on Sito's body were caused before he was captured on Argo. It was not unreasonable. It was common for the Celts to beat people half to death when they captured them, and they did not have the habit of healing their captives. In other words, Beowulf did not know how to heal at all, and he did not realize that he should heal Sito. In short, that guy was dead.
Let's not care about him.
Then, Wuming felt that something was wrong. Medea was the disciple of the goddess of magic, Hecate. She had many healing methods, so why didn't she heal Sito? However, Medea seemed to have seen through Wuming's question and answered it in advance. Miss Sito has always refused me to heal her, and she said something like, even if I die, I don't want to be a burden to Lord Rama. As if recalling the scene when Sito said those words, Medea was a little depressed. She also wanted to sacrifice herself for the people she loved like Sito did, but Ison, while Medea was distracted, Wuming frowned in distress. However, he began to laugh bitterly in his heart. So, if the other party did not want to heal, wouldn't you forcefully heal her? How gentle are you? However, if I didn't see wrongly, Ison wanted to use Sito and the Holy Grail to summon the demon god Pillar. Wuming narrowed his eyes and looked at Ison, who was so frightened that he could not speak. When Wuming said those words, Rama instantly raised his head with anger in his eyes. Rama was slower than Wuming by a bit. When he arrived, Wuming had already seized the Holy Grail and restrained Ison and Medea with Atlanta. It was also Rama's arrival that caused the extremely weak Sito to fall into a coma. Following Wuming's instructions, Rama stumbled and found Sito through Sito's position that was left in his eyes. However, it did not work. Rama could not see Sito at all, nor could he touch Sito. However, he did not give up and kept calling out Sito's name. How could a man who loved his wife not be enraged when he found out that his wife had almost been used as a sacrifice? Bang! Chapter 5:35. Bang! Wuming moved his spear away from Ison's neck and blocked Rama's indestructible blade. Under the blade of the indestructible blade was Ison, who was paralyzed on the ground. However, Demetrius, who made a little movement, was stopped by Atlanta's arrows. Calm down, Rama. Wuming tried to persuade Rama gently. You want me to calm down? The guy who almost turned Sito into a demon god Pillar is right in front of me. How can I calm down? Rama's eyes were burning with flames as he stared at Ison fiercely, as if he wanted to eat Ison alive. We are friends, right? If so, listen to my advice. Ison is still useful, so don't kill him for the time being. Otherwise, Wuming, who had already snatched the Greek Holy Grail, would have already made his move. Rama looked at Wuming and nodded. He then continued to stare at Ison fiercely. Maeve, please do me a favor. Wuming waved at Maeve, who looked like she was watching a family drama. Yes, Maeve smiled and came to Wuming's side. After that, Wuming took out a lot of healing potions from his precious artifact space. He then opened the teleportation door and let Maeve bring Sito away for the time being. After all, if Sito stayed with Rama any longer, he would disappear soon. After Wuming told Maeve about various things, Maeve carried Sito into the teleportation door. Thank you very much, Holy King.
No, surrender.
Rama said sincerely to Wuming. It was an eye-opener for Wuming to be able to make the proud and arrogant Rama, who often threw tantrums, apologize so sincerely. Since you are able to call me by my name, it means that we are friends, right? As he spoke, Wuming placed the Holy Grail into the golden ripple under Ison's gaze. He then extended his hand to Rama. Although Wuming treated Rama as a friend when Reeve shook hands with Rama, he did not expect that. Yes, that's right, my friend. Then, Rama and Wuming held each other's hands tightly. Then, don't attack Ison for the time being, all right? Wuming glanced at Ison, causing Ison to shuffle backwards in fright. After all, Ison was currently sitting on the ground. Sure. After all, this person had saved his wife, Sidwa. Moreover, this person was also his friend. Thus, Rama would naturally listen to him. As Rama spoke, he glared at Ison and no longer looked at him. Otherwise, the anger in his heart would not dissipate. Although Rama had promised Wuming to spare Ison's life for the time being, he wasn't the kind of person who would forgive someone who almost sacrificed his wife. It was also because of Wuming's face. Otherwise, even if Gadatsi was here, with Rama's childish temper, he would have used the indestructible blade to slash Ison. Yes, the kind that even their own mother wouldn't be able to recognize. So, Ison, now you are our captive. Wuming smiled and narrowed his eyes, which made Ison and even Demetrius feel a chill. In the sky, the Argo was moving towards Alexandria. On the Argo, Ison was controlling the Argo alone at the helm. If one didn't look at Ison's livid face and Atlanta behind him, who was holding the heavenly bow and staring at Ison as if he was her prey, then Ison's situation was not that bad. Demetrius, who was originally following Ison, was at the bow with Wuming and Rama, explaining the current situation of the Greek side. In short, after sending out Hercules, Hector, and the captive Spartacus, we only have Ison, Atlanta, and me left. Wuming did not look at Demetrius. He just looked ahead as if he was experiencing the feeling of flying in a boat. As for Rama, he sat cross-legged alone on the deck behind Wuming and Demetrius with his eyes closed, as if everything had nothing to do with him until they reached their destination, Alexandria. This was Wuming's purpose. Through Ison, he drove the Argo to Gadatsi and others' gathering place, Alexandria. At this moment, only Rome was left on this continent, and it was now being restrained by Gadatsi and others. This time, the battle against Greece was also messed up because of Spartacus' self-destruction. Although Finn, Dilmund, and Fergus had all left the stage, Silent Noise had taken the opportunity to imprison Hercules. She had also captured Ison and Demetrius, so overall, it was still a good outcome. As for Achilles and Hector, Wuming did not disturb them, just like he did not disturb Karna and Ajo. Now, as long as he got the Holy Grail of Rome, this singularity would be over. With that in mind, Wuming let out a long sigh as he looked at the clouds in the sky. At this moment, because Wuming and Rama did not reply, Demetrius waited there. Because waiting was boring, Demetrius would look at Ison from time to time, but every time, she would turn her head away in an instant. She was very nervous. She should be afraid of being misunderstood by Wuming and Rama. However, how could Wuming and Rama not notice it? Ahem, I already know the specific situation. Wuming clenched his fist and put it on his mouth and coughed. This scared little Medea so much that she trembled and almost cried. Don't worry, I won't do anything to Ison. Wuming shook his head helplessly, trying to calm Demetrius down. But, you cast such a vicious curse on Sir Ison. As she spoke, Demetrius looked like she was about to cry. Isn't it obvious? Wuming said with a bitter smile. I don't believe that Ison will be obedient. After all, he's a hero who can leave his name in the martyr's palace. Although Ison was weak, at least he was invincible when it came to piloting a ship. It could be seen from the fact that Wuming did not feel the slightest tremor when he stood at the bow of the ship. Moreover, the existence that could be chosen by the two great restraints and dragged into the martyr's palace, regardless of whether it was a hero or an anti-hero, would definitely not be the same as ordinary people. Wuming could not be sure if Ison would betray him or do something else when Wuming and the others attacked Rome. Therefore, Wuming planted a lot of complicated Lunrune tactics in Ison's body. Then he told Demetrius and Ison that as long as Wuming willed it, Ison would experience what it meant to be in a living hell. Because what he said was true, Ison and Demetrius believed him. Moreover, when Wuming planted those complicated Lunrune tactics, Demetrius was beside him. No matter how much Ison cried and howled, Ison, who was being held down by Rama, had his body implanted with those tactics in front of Demetrius, who was being watched by Atlanta. However, Wuming did not know anything about curses, nor did he study them. So, what he said was a complete lie. However, no matter who saw those extremely complicated and mysterious Lunrune tactics, they would not doubt Wuming's words. In the eyes of others, it was an extremely vicious curse. As long as you are obedient, nothing will happen. Wuming looked at Demetrius with a smile. Demetrius could only nod helplessly. After all, they could not defeat Wuming and the others. Chapter 536. Since Rama used him as a laborer, Ison's sailing speed was still very fast. Wuming estimated that it would only take about 10 minutes to reach Alexandria. Demetrius, who had been staying beside Wuming, spoke hesitantly. What's wrong? Wuming looked at Demetrius and asked. Just tell me what you want to know. There's no need to beat around the bush. After that, Demetrius took a deep breath and asked the question. Excuse me, the purplish black hole just now, was it a teleportation magic? Wuming was stunned for a moment before he realized what she meant. The purplish black hole that Demetrius was referring to was undoubtedly the teleportation door that Wuming came to the Argo. That's a magic trick that I learned from the other world. It's called gate. Gate. Demetrius repeated the word as she pondered. The effect is that based on the place that I've been to or the place that I've seen, I can create a teleportation door anywhere. Wuming briefly explained how to use the gate. Anywhere. Demetrius was obviously shocked. Pay attention to the premise. It must be a place that I've been to or the place that I've seen. Wuming knocked Demetrius's little head. This scene was extremely similar to a teacher scolding a disobedient student. Whoa. But even so, it's still very powerful. Demetrius exclaimed as she hugged her little head and cried. Then, are there any side effects or other disadvantages? Demetrius raised her little hand. At this moment, she was also super interested in magic. There are no side effects at all. Well, if there's a disadvantage, it's that it can't be instantly teleported. Wuming looked at Demetrius with a perfect smile. At this moment, Demetrius's little head was filled with question marks. After all, you have to open the teleportation door first and then walk in. If you use this trick in a direct battle, it would definitely be useless. Also, if you use this skill in battle, if you can't close it in time, the enemy can also go through the portal. After all, Demetrius could only teleport by herself. That way, she would not be able to bring the enemy along with her. You're exaggerating. Even if that's the case, the magic you've learned from the other world is already very powerful. As long as you've been to a place before, or even a place as far as your eyes can see, it's really a powerful magic trick. Demetrius was slightly dazed. Indeed, this other world's magic is indeed very powerful. Either it's impossible to use it at all, but once you learn it, not only is the mana consumption low, but you can also move many people. It's much more useful than ordinary spatial magic. That's amazing, Medea said enviously. Do you want to learn? Wuming suddenly asked when he saw the envious look on Medea's face. Is it really possible? Demetrius shouted excitedly. Of course. You're not Ison. I have a good impression of you. Wuming was right. Such a naive little princess. Because Ison went to the palace of the beauty goddess to make a wish, she fell in love with Ison, and her life was ruined. Regarding this, Wuming naturally did not mind teaching her the portal. Of course, the prerequisite was that Demetrius could learn it. But, we're still enemies. Demetrius began to hesitate. It has to be said that even if she had the reputation of a traitor witch, the current Demetrius was undoubtedly an obedient and sensible princess. Because of the hostile relationship between the two of them, she was worried about whether Wuming teaching her magic tricks would be inappropriate. She was really a cute little princess. With the current situation, do you think we can still be considered enemies? Wuming teased. Indeed. Now we're captives. Demetrius smiled awkwardly. Then, are you willing to learn this magic trick from me, Demetrius? Wuming looked at Demetrius with great respect. Yes, I'm willing, teacher. Demetrius gripped her staff tightly, with a serious expression. At this moment, Ison seemed to have been removed from Demetrius's mind. Demetrius only wanted to learn the portal magic trick. Then let us begin. Immediately after, a strange scene appeared on the deck. Wuming and Demetrius stood facing each other with their eyes closed. Wuming's hand was placed on Demetrius's head. Both of them did not move at all. This piqued Rama's interest. My friend, what are you doing? However, Wuming did not immediately answer Rama. After a moment, Wuming opened his eyes and put down his hand on Demetrius's head. It's just a simple memory-sharing magic trick. After all, it's more efficient this way. Alright, actually, it was Wuming who did not know how to teach. Even he himself used the game scroll to learn the portal magic trick. However, it was not impossible to reverse the process. However, Wuming had never thought of teaching anyone, and no one had asked Wuming. Therefore, Wuming did not research on how to teach others the portal magic trick. After reading the nameless spellbook for a period of time, Wuming did not look at it anymore. It was fine as long as they could use it. Moreover, Wuming did not dare to guarantee that people from other worlds could learn the magic trick of the game Yggdrasil. Wuming also chose to teach Demetrius this magic trick because she was a little girl who was passionate about magic. Without any ambiguity, Wuming and Demetrius' relationship was only that of a teacher and a student. Rama did not say anything else. After all, he did not know much about magic and was not very interested in it. Therefore, he walked to the bow of the ship and looked at the scenery. As for Wuming, he looked at Demetrius, who still had her eyes closed. At that moment, Wuming's heart was filled with anticipation. Could the magic trick of the game Yggdrasil be learned by the miraculous hero spirit of this world? Wuming was very curious. After about 10 seconds, Demetrius opened her eyes. Her eyes were as beautiful as gemstones. His eyes were brimming with excitement and joy. The result was obvious. From the looks of it, you should have learned teleportation gate, right, Demetrius? Wuming smiled at Demetrius, pleased. Yes, teacher. I have successfully learned this magic trick. Demetrius shouted excitedly, like a small animal. Thank you very much, teacher. Demetrius bowed deeply to Wuming to express her gratitude. For Demetrius, who was very interested in magic, being able to learn the magic trick of another world was a great favor. Just as Wuming wanted to say something, Rama, who was at the bow of the ship, spoke. What? Chapter 537. My friend, come and see that, Rama said to Wuming while pointing in a certain direction. Wuming, who reacted, felt that he didn't need to look because the chilling magic power had been transmitted to him. But even so, Wuming continued to shift his gaze in the direction that Rama was pointing at. This place was a few kilometers north of Alexandria City. It could be said that they had not completely arrived at Alexandria City. At the location of Alexandria City, a behemoth appeared at this moment. A huge meat pillar that reached the sky, countless eyes that were constantly twisting, and a huge magic power that belonged to the demon god. Demon god pillar. Wuming narrowed his eyes. There was no doubt that it was the demon god pillar summoned by the Holy Grail of Rome. Could it be that Sharon and the others had forced Rome into a corner? Otherwise, why would the other party casually summon the demon god pillar? Or could it be that Rome's forces were already on the verge of collapse? If that was the case, it was not unimaginable that they would be forced to sacrifice the demon god pillar. Wuming pondered. But this has confirmed that Rome was indeed defeated by Greece. At this moment, the Argo suddenly stopped.
Huh.
Wuming turned to look at Ison, who was at the helm. However, at this moment, Ison was squatting on the ground with his head in his hands. Even when Atlanta pointed her bow at him, he did not get up. With a sudden jump, Wuming came to the helm. What's going on? This guy suddenly doesn't dare to go forward anymore. Atlanta stared at Ison with disgust. Ison, on the other hand, ignored Atlanta's angry glare, as if he would rather die with his corpse intact. Ison, it seems that you know what that is. Wuming looked at Ison with interest. Of course I know. That's the demon god pillar. If we go there, we'll just be throwing our lives away. Moreover, we won't even have a complete corpse. I don't want to go there. Ison's face was pale, but he still shouted loudly at Wuming. Indeed, although Wuming basically cut down the demon god pillars like vegetables, that was only because Wuming's authority was powerful. Basically, every time Wuming got rid of a demon god pillar, he would use his authority. After all, demon gods were still gods. The authority obtained from killing gods was especially effective against demon gods. However, even if the demon god pillar was frequently destroyed by Wuming, it was undeniable that the demon god pillar possessed the supreme power of a demon god. It could be said that ordinary servants or even first-class servants could not defeat a demon god pillar, and the same was true for some of the top servants. Of course, unless one had a special relic or skill, only those who had reached Karna's level would be able to fight against the demon god pillars. As for the servants who were currently in Alexandria, even if Sharon was there was nothing they could do. Wuming suddenly thought of someone. If it's that vampire, he might have the power to defeat the demon god pillar. Although Pamilia was a monster and classified as an anti-hero, it was undeniable that the vampire had her own principles and restrictions. If there was a word to describe it, it would be aristocrat. If there was a word to add, it would be mysterious. After all, there was no record of such a vampire from anywhere. However, it was precisely because of this that Wuming felt that the other party had the means to deal with the demon god pillar. One must know that keeping a mysterious might not work in other worlds, but in the X-Moon world, it was a universal pass. In short, Wuming felt that the other party had that kind of ability. However, even if that was the case, Wuming could not choose not to take action. In that case, you stay here alone. We will go there ourselves. Without forcing Ison, Wuming took Atlanta away and went to meet with Romo. Before leaving, Atlanta once again stared at Ison fiercely, which scared Ison again. Without caring about Ison, Wuming found Demetrius. Since Ison is not willing to go, then Demetrius, you will send us there. Wuming said with a smile. Hey.
Hey, me?
Demetrius was a little panicked. After all, at the moment, her spirit base was still that of an innocent little girl. Such a solemn task could be said to be quite difficult for her. Didn't you learn the magic I taught you? Now is the time to test you, Demetrius. Open the place where your eyes can reach. Wuming pointed to the direction of the demon god pillar. When Wuming said that, Demetrius was stunned. That's right, this is the time to test my results. Immediately afterward, under Wuming's encouraging eyes, Demetrius nodded heavily.
Yes.
I will work hard, teacher. Immediately afterward, Demetrius closed her eyes and began to activate the teleportation gate magic, or rather, magic. Wuming directly shared his memories and feelings of using the teleportation gate with Demetrius. Since Demetrius had confidently said that she had learned it, then she must have learned it. Wuming did not think that as a famous magician of the gods, Demetrius would deliberately deceive him because she could not learn such magic. As a result, as expected, gate! Demetrius opened her eyes, raised her magic wand, and shouted. Immediately afterward, a pinkish-purple ripple as tall as a person appeared in front of Wuming and the other two. Atlanta and Romo looked at the pinkish-purple ripple with an indescribable expression. This made Demetrius blush instantly.
Why?
The pinkish-purple ripple filled the heart of a young girl.
Hey.
However, Wuming could only helplessly smile bitterly. This was really in line with Demetrius's character. Well done, Demetrius. You are indeed my disciple. After all, the necessary praise could not be lacking. Yes, thank you for your praise, teacher. After hearing her teacher's praise, Demetrius's face changed from red to normal. Although the color was a little strange, it was obvious that Demetrius had successfully released the teleportation gate. After nodding to Atlanta and Romo, the two walked into the teleportation gate. Then, Wuming looked at Demetrius. If possible, I really don't want my excellent disciple to fall into the hands of that guy. That guy was undoubtedly referring to Ison. But teacher, I am deeply in love with Lord Ison now. Demetrius did not care about Wuming's words. Instead, she showed a faint smile. Forget it, as long as you are happy, my disciple. Wuming shook his head with a smile and walked into the teleportation gate. I wish you good luck, teacher. Demetrius prayed silently. Chapter 5:38. In the city of Alexandria, which had become a battlefield, there were ruins everywhere. And under the ruins, there were many residents who lived in the city. Compared to Greece, Celtic, and even Japan, Rome could be described as a force that was incomparably generous to civilians. After all, it was Rome, so it was not surprising. In this way, many residents would choose to live in the safest capital. Those people who were crushed under the ruins were such existences. However, the demon god Pillar did not care about the life and death of those people. In other words, these residents would be attacked indiscriminately like the servants. Of course, the premise was that the servants didn't do anything. Matthew effortlessly lifted a stone slab that was pressing on a woman. Gadotsi quickly went up and helped the woman up. Are you okay? I will take you to a safe place. Gadotsi said eagerly. Child, my child. The woman said weakly, looking at the collapsed house. Gadotsi and Matthew could not bear to look at the woman. The possibility of a baby being crushed under such a collapsed house was almost zero. However, as if there was a temporary traffic jam in the underworld, the baby did not lose his life. Wah, wah, as if he heard the voice of his mother, a baby's cry came. My child. The woman wanted to rush to the ruins to save her child. However, she was seriously injured, and after leaving Gadotsi's support, she directly collapsed to the ground. Are you okay? Don't worry, we will save your child. Gadotsi quickly supported the woman who collapsed to the ground. Then Gadotsi nodded to Matthew. Matthew was stunned, nodded, and was ready to save the child. Human life is so strong and beautiful. Matthew smiled and thought. Then, a tentacle suddenly stretched out, or rather, smashed down. The target seemed to be Gadotsi. Matthew naturally quickly came to Gadotsi's side and blocked the attack with his shield. After Matthew came to Gadotsi's side, Gadotsi's wrist suddenly made a sound. Matthew, its target is the child. As if confirming the voice's words, the tentacle dramatically and strangely changed its direction, and its target was the ruins where the baby's cry came from. No! The child's mother screamed at the top of her lungs, trying to stop the tentacles. However, it all happened so fast that Gadotsi, the woman, and even Matthew were powerless to stop it. Matthew did not expect the tentacles to be so strange. Using Gadotsi as bait, he forced Matthew to change the formation. As a result, his target became the baby under the ruins. Just like that, the tentacle fell towards the baby. Just as the tentacle was about to fall, a voice sounded in Mashu's and Guda's ears. Brahmastra, indestructible Rakshasa. In an instant, the indestructible blade spun with thunder and hit the tentacle. The tentacle was sent flying with an indescribable sound that sounded like a scream. The powerful and perfectly controlled power did not hurt the ruins below when it sent the tentacle flying. Taking advantage of this moment, Matthew went directly to the place where the baby was crying. He used his magic to gently clean up the ruins, revealing the cute child who was miraculously alive in the corner. Although the baby was still crying, it was indeed a symbol of life in everyone's eyes. Great. Matthew quickly picked up the baby, came to the woman, and handed the baby to the woman, the baby's mother. Thank you, my child, my child. After hurriedly thanking Gadotsi and Matthew, the woman held her child and kept talking. The indestructible blade flew back after sending the tentacle monkey flying. Matthew looked at the person in surprise. It's really Mr. Rama. It was Rama's noble phantasm that sent the tentacle flying. But Gadotsi was concerned about another thing. In other words, Assassin is also here. Gadotsi looked around, but she did not find any trace of Wuming. At this time, looking at Gadotsi, who was searching around, Rama spoke. Don't look for him. My friend is not here. Then, Gadotsi's little face looked like she was crying. How could this be? On the other side, Sharon and the other so-called main battle servants were in charge of attacking. Why Elizabeth jumped and dodged a huge tentacle attack. How rude. How could you treat a lady like this? Why Elizabeth patted the dust on her dress with lingering fear and said with dissatisfaction, Miss, what time is it now? Do you still care about those things? Robin Hood complained, rolled, and fired a few useless shots at the huge demon god pillar not far away. Take care of yourself, green rat. Why Elizabeth shouted at Robin Hood angrily. Robin Hood could only helplessly take a few steps back, a look of discomfort on his face. Then, the blue and white flame flew past Why Elizabeth's hair. Why Elizabeth screamed in fear. Do you want to kill me? Why Elizabeth touched her hair and looked at Kyoheim with tears in her eyes. Sure enough, your lizard is useless. Kyoheim did not answer Why Elizabeth directly, but released the flame at the demon god pillar while mocking Why Elizabeth. Of course, Kyoheim's attack was not very effective. Do you want to fight, fire-breathing snake? Why Elizabeth stared at Kyoheim fiercely. Come on, I'm not afraid of you. And Kyoheim also stared back at Why Elizabeth. Sigh, Robin Hood sighed helplessly. This is a battlefield, young missus. The enemy is a demon god pillar. Take it easy, even if they seriously deal with the demon god pillar, it won't have any effect. Billy Boy, who suddenly appeared, pressed his hat, and his face was full of helplessness. After hearing Billy Boy's words, Robin Hood also showed a helpless smile. As a servant, their spiritual base was too low, and they couldn't cause damage to the demon god pillar. They couldn't even attract or restrain it. Only a few tentacles attacked them, and they were the waterproof kind. Because the other tentacles were attacking Sharon. Geronimo, who was following behind Billy Boy, frowned helplessly and looked to the north. I hope the second team can complete the mission smoothly. Then they could support them. Then, Geronimo saw the lightning that represented the indestructible blade and smiled. They're coming. Chapter 539. On the so-called head-on battlefield. Ka Rong transformed into a centaur, attacking the demon god pillars with his bow in the midst of the mechanical infantry. Sharon was able to hit the demon god pillar's eyes with his skills. Why was it only at the beginning? It was because the demon god pillar was no fool and knew how to defend. Karen retreated slightly, and countless mechanical infantry rushed towards the demon god pillar. However, the demon god pillar only needed to use a few dozen tentacles to directly blow up the mechanical infantry that were attacking it. This is a disaster. Edison roared as he hugged the lion's head behind the countless mechanical infantry soldiers. So noisy.
Be quiet.
But at Madame Blavatsky's snarl, Edison obediently held his tongue. If this continues, we will be wiped out. Sharon frowned and came to the two to see if they could come up with a plan. The three looked at Nightingale, who was charging with the mechanical soldiers, but was constantly being pushed back. They felt helpless and relieved. If not for Nightingale's stubborn personality, she would not have attracted the demon god pillar. After all, it was a berserker. However, if this continues, something will happen to Miss Nightingale. Helena looked worriedly at Nightingale, who was constantly spinning and jumping under the demon god pillar's tentacles and was sent flying again. As if toying with Nightingale, the demon god pillar did not use its full strength. Although it seemed like the demon god pillar's attacks were ineffective, Sharon and the others noticed that the demon god pillar was going easy on them. Otherwise, it would not have the time to attack Matthew and the others. If we look at the worst-case scenario, this demon god pillar might be smarter than we thought. Helena frowned as if she was facing a great enemy. I have a bad feeling. I feel like the demon god pillar is waiting for something. Karen's face darkened. This way, the demon god pillar was definitely scheming something. Edison was like a lion and did not understand the conversation between the two. At this moment, a voice resounded through the sky. A gigantic spear of light that had never appeared before came from afar and hit the demon god pillar. The demon god pillar let out an unrecognizable voice. It was obvious that the noble artifact's owner had poured a huge amount of magic into this attack. The noble artifact was released. That was the Holy King's voice. Edison said as he looked around for Wu Ming. Over there. Sharon pointed. At this moment, Wu Ming, with his A+ grade agility, launched a surprise attack on the demon god pillar. At this moment, Wu Ming had already put on his armor and wore a helmet that completely covered his head. Wu Ming was like a silver dragon. As for the demon god pillar, it was as if the person it was waiting for had arrived. Regardless of whether it was the mechanical infantry or Nightingale, the demon god pillar no longer cared about them. Countless tentacles extended from the demon god pillar's muscles to attack. Wu Ming at the same time, the Wu Ming was the demon god pillar's and Wu Ming. Countless tentacles surrounded Wu Ming from all directions, which could be described as a killing move for ordinary servants. However, for Wu Ming, although it was dangerous, it was not fatal. Wu Ming did not stop and continued to run toward the demon god pillar, ignoring the Wu Ming's corrosive tentacles. The air vibrated, and a buzzing sound was heard. Then, the magic around Wu Ming's body condensed, and under Wu Ming's control, the condensed magic exploded in the surroundings. Boom! A dull sound was heard, and a ring of magic that could be seen with the naked eye spread out from Wu Ming in an instant. The encirclement formed by the Wu Ming's tentacles was instantly broken through by the magic that could be seen with the naked eye. Like petals, the tentacles were fragmented and turned into pure magic that dissipated. This was pure power that did not require any fancy tricks. What? Helena was shocked when she saw this scene. What's wrong? Edison asked cautiously. Madame Blavatsky was just sighing at his strength. Sharon smiled helplessly and explained to Edison. Just the simple release of magic was enough to destroy the metal of the tentacles that everyone worked together to destroy. From this, it could be seen how powerful Wu Ming was in terms of the amount and control of magic. Compressing a large amount of magic, condensing it around his body, and then releasing the compressed magic in the form of Wu Ming's magic was a test of his control. And the premise of this was that he had sufficient magic power. It can be said that the magic power just now is comparable to the magic power required by the light spear, or even exceeded it by a lot. To be able to use the magic power of such a noble artifact to release magic power, it was not something that a first-rate servant could do. It could be said that even a first-rate servant would not have such magic power. After all, if the amount of magic power was not enough, it would be impossible to do it. And to be able to use that kind of magic power twice without batting an eyelid, it could be seen that Wu Ming was not ordinary. The most important thing was that Wuming only used magic power to destroy the tentacles, which was enough to prove that Wuming was powerful. True power was not a fancy ability, but a kind of power that had reached the pinnacle. So that's how it is. Your Excellency Holy Ruler is indeed Your Excellency Holy Ruler, to be so powerful. Edison's lion head showed an expression of sudden realization. However, such an expression was quite comical in the eyes of others. Since the Holy Ruler is here, it means that the Greek side has been resolved. Helena breathed a sigh of relief. Sharon seemed to agree with Helena's opinion and nodded. However, I feel a little uneasy about the demon god pillar here. Sharon looked at the demon god pillar. As a sage who had taught many heroes, Sharon had a feeling. That demon god pillar was not an ordinary one, but one with a strong will. It could be seen from the previous performance, so Sharon was very worried that the other side was up to something. However, even if there was a conspiracy, such a battle was not something they could investigate. In short, we should take this opportunity to save a few more injured residents. We can't let down to Chica's sincerity. The three nodded and slipped away from the battlefield. At the same time, they also took away Nightingale, who still wanted to charge at the demon god pillar. Edison brought the few remaining mechanical infantry and began to search for survivors. On Wuming's side, Wuming looked at the demon god pillar and vaguely felt a sense of familiarity. But even so, Wuming's actions did not stop. Wuming waved his hand, and the holy spear of light appeared out of nowhere and landed in Wuming's hand. Then, Wuming raised the spear of light to his shoulder and threw it at the demon god pillar like a javelin. The spear of light gradually thinned and turned into a needle of light. However, the demon god pillar only summoned a few more tentacles, blocking the needle of light. Wuming was not surprised. After all, Wuming had only injected a small amount of magic power, so it was not surprising that the demon god pillar could block it. At this moment, the demon god pillar suddenly spoke. "Dragon of Origin, you're finally here." Chapter 540. Wuming's expression changed as he recognized the voice. "Lev." Wuming said the name. "As expected of the Dragon of Origin, you still remember me. But my current name is Flawless, Demon God Pillar Flawless." The Demon God Pillar laughed. "But I don't think it's such a coincidence that the Demon God Pillar summoned this time is you." Wuming didn't believe that this wasn't Lev's doing. With 72 Demon God Pillars, Wuming didn't think his luck would be so good. The 72 Demon God Pillars are 1. Unless you can destroy all the Demon God Pillars in an instant, I won't die. Demon God Pillar Flawless laughed eerily with Lev's voice. Wuming could imagine Lev's ugly face. However, this provided Wuming with information. "I did think that you wouldn't die so easily, but I didn't expect us to meet so soon." Wuming didn't attack again, and Demon God Pillar Flawless didn't attack either. The two of them started to talk. "This can't be helped. I'm the Demon God Pillar in charge of the information room." In other words, the other party might be able to see Wuming through some means or opportunity. "As soon as you came to this singularity, I was already paying attention to you through the Holy Grail, Sarand." As if victory was already in his hands, Demon God Pillar Flawless said slowly. Wuming couldn't wait for someone to tell him the current situation, so he didn't disturb him and calmly listened to the Demon God Pillar. "Oh, then what about that guy? Didn't he come personally? The chaos here is a gift he prepared for me. I don't want to steal the limelight." Wuming mocked the Magic King. "Why would our king care about an immature dragon of origin? To tell you the truth, even if the Master of Chaldea conquered all 7 singularities with your help, it wouldn't affect our king at all." In other words, the other party had the confidence to win, or had the strength to not be disturbed. Wuming pondered. "This is also the reason why our great king let you go in London's underground cavern. He. Demon God Pillar Flawless let out a terrifying laugh. Wuming frowned but didn't refute him. Wuming clearly knew that he was indeed very weak. When facing a powerful enemy like the Magic King who was strengthened by the Black Origin soil, Wuming only had 2 things that could compare. The 12 incarnations who killed God stole the god's authority and combined with his own abilities and origin baptism. Also the Blade of Salvation, Divine Blade, Savior's authority. The Blade of Salvation was also the Divine Blade Messiah's power. Although many of Wu Ming's abilities had been baptized by origin, there was no doubt that an ability or item with a high starting point would have a high achievement after being baptized by origin. Just like the 12 incarnations and Blade of Salvation. Other than that, whether it was the Loon magic that Wu Ming had learned, the World Trees magic from the alternate world, or the various powerful items that he had obtained, or even the relics that had been turned into Wu Ming's own, they were all rather useless. That was because when facing an enemy like the Magic King, these abilities and relics were useless. Moreover, Flawless also said that Wu Ming was an immature root dragon. Although in the eyes of many, Wu Ming was already very powerful, Wu Ming himself knew that he was actually very weak. After staying in the root dragon for a long time, Wu Ming gradually realized that a mature root dragon could be said to be the ruler of all the worlds, the protector of all the worlds. If he had to use a word to describe it, it would be the suppression of all the worlds. In other words, it was the heavenly axiom. It could be said that it was precisely because Wu Ming knew that he would eventually become such an existence that Wu Ming began to face the love that Maeve and the others had for him. After all, if Wu Ming kept delaying until then, perhaps Wu Ming's heart would really have turned into the merciless heavenly Tao. Take the planet's consciousness, Gaia, and the human consciousness, Alea, as an example. As long as it did not threaten Earth and the human race as a whole, they would not care. Moreover, if it was only a threat to one side, the other side would basically not care. For example, in the crisis of the M-Moon world, the Magic King's means had threatened Alea, so Alea naturally had to do her best to save it. The Holy Grail's ability to summon servants on its own was the self-defense mechanism that Alea had activated. However, because the Gaia and Alea of this world had a slightly special relationship, the two of them could be considered to be in love, probably cough cough. In short, if Wu Ming had reached adulthood, then there was no doubt that he would be able to defeat the Magic King effortlessly. But now, the Magic King who had the origin black mud was not afraid of Wu Ming, who was an immature origin dragon. After all, if hope was killed in the cradle, then this so-called hope would be nothing. Then, what is the meaning of your current actions? Is it purely for the sake of waiting for me to pass the time? Wu Ming was naturally referring to the matter of pretending to be led by the nose by Sharon and the others. Not only that, Wu Ming, who had fully activated his mental power, saw why Lisabeth and the others' futility, and also saw that Flawless was deliberately targeting Gadotsi and Matthew. Wu Ming sensed that one of the tentacles of the demon god pillar was absent-minded, and his intuition told him that Gadotsi and Matthew, who were searching for survivors, were in danger. Wu Ming trusted his intuition the most. As the origin dragon, all the worlds would subconsciously help Wu Ming, and this so-called intuition was also the help of similar worlds. Otherwise, why would Romo meet Gadotsi so coincidentally and repel the tentacle that wanted to kill the child Matthew was about to rescue? It was because Romo was asked by Wu Ming to meet Gadotsi and the others. Just treat it as my selfishness. My selfishness towards Matthew. Flawless, or rather Lev, was silent for a few seconds before answering Wu Ming. Oh, the demon god pillar has selfishness? That's really surprising. You don't have to deliberately mock me. No matter what, I have spent a lot of time in Chaldea. After saying that, Flawless stopped talking about this and turned to the root of this matter. Then, let's start the ravaging. Treat it as the price for the ravaging you did to me. As he said that, the countless eyes on the demon god pillar lit up with red light, and countless black and purple mist emitted from the demon god pillar. The ravaging began. Chapter 541. Needless to say, the demon god pillar Flawless this time was different from the one Wu Ming encountered in the Winterwood City. Not only was the shape and color more vigorous, but the attack power of the demon god pillar had also increased a lot. Because Flawless' target was Wu Ming, it did not disperse its attack. Instead, It deliberately gathered together to attack Wu Ming. Wu Ming naturally did not die in the first wave of attack, but he was slightly injured. Looking at the ground around the demon god pillar that was destroyed by the demon god mist and heat ray, Wu Ming's sense of danger towards Flawless increased by another level. The power of the heat ray emitted by the demon god pillar's eyes increased a lot. Anyway, it gave Wu Ming a sense of crisis. Although it was a little exaggerated, Wu Ming did rely on his skills and speed to avoid the heat ray. However, because it brushed past him several times, Wu Ming felt the intensity of the heat ray. Not only that, the dark purple demon mist was also a lot stronger. It could be said that if it were Elizabeth and the other servants, they would not be able to last more than 5 seconds in the demon mist. As for Sharon, who was restrained by poison, the demon mist with the poison attribute could even send Sharon back to the martyr's palace when it came in contact with him. Wu Ming had the noble armor, so his body was not hurt. However, the demon mist had the ability to ignore defense and corrode the spiritual base. A part of Wu Ming's spiritual base was directly corroded. As a result, Wu Ming repeatedly used his magic to release skills and rushed out of the area covered by the demon mist. The demon god pillar Flawless seemed to be deliberately playing with Wu Ming. After the first wave, it retracted the demon mist and did not attack again. How is it, Cylinder? This is the power that our king has bestowed upon us. The demon god pillar's eyes spun faster, and the demon mist was vaguely released again. It was not a precursor to an attack, but a sign of excitement and demonstration. After stretching his limbs, Wu Ming felt relieved when he sensed that Gadotsi, Sharon, and Elizabeth had retreated. His body was a servant's body that he created. Even if he died, it wouldn't matter. But Gadotsi wasn't like that. She was a complete human being. Seeing that Gadotsi and the others were covering the few rescued residents and retreating into the distance, Wu Ming once again used his mental power to search the ruins. Wu Ming heaved a sigh of relief after checking that there were no living beings. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about his surroundings. Your power comes from the Holy Grail, right? Since the Holy Grail was created by the Magic King, it's not hard to guess that it's able to help you demon god pillars. Wu Ming did not feel dispirited because the demon god pillar Flawless temporarily gained the upper hand. Instead, he began to make inferences. Oh, that's true. But so what? Flawless believed in the power given by its king. It was not afraid of Wu Ming's pretending to be calm in its eyes. This is power. The power that can defeat you in this era. The demon god pillar roared. Countless heat rays and demon mist attacked again. The momentum was much stronger than before. After I kill you, I'll kill everyone in this era. Who cares about being the last master of mankind? I'll let Chaldea and the others meet their doom in despair. At that moment, Flawless was a little excited. However, this had nothing to do with Wu Ming. He continued to dodge. Wu Ming retreated 1,000 meters away. Indeed, this body doesn't have the ability to deal with you for the time being. Even if it was the legend of the Holy King, mythical Yggdrasil, its greatest power, without charging, could only injure the demon god pillar that had obtained the power of the Magic King. If he wanted to kill it, he would need to charge up for a long time. Of course, Flawless would not give Wu Ming the chance. That was why Wu Ming did not have the ability to deal with Flawless for the time being. But unfortunately, I've just become good friends with Rama. Wu Ming smiled at Flawless. However, this smile made Flawless feel uneasy. Although Flawless was not afraid of Wu Ming, he did not think that Wu Ming was bluffing. What if he really had a way to deal with him? With this thought, Flawless increased the amount of magic output. In an instant, the countless eyes on the demon god pillar began to bleed. The amount of magic output exceeded the demon god pillar's tolerance and hurt itself instead. However, the result was a dark ball of light that was comparable to the power of dozens of holy swords appearing in front of the demon god pillar. Wu Ming could feel that if the dark ball of light exploded or formed into a light cannon, the power would definitely be able to blow up a huge hole in the American continent. It could even be said that it would not be difficult to create a new lake. It could be said that if Wu Ming did not activate his noble artifact, Arthur's gift, he would have been forced to leave the stage after being injured by this attack. As Flawless, who had been observing Wu Ming ever since he came to this singularity, he naturally knew that Wu Ming had such a noble phantasm. However, he knew that Wu Ming's noble phantasm was not like the legendary Avalon that could form an invincible domain. Wu Ming's noble phantasm was only an invincible shield. In that case, he only needed to go around the invincible shield. As Flawless, who had accepted the power of his king, he naturally had such a method. No matter if it was using the space fault or forcefully turning the light cannon, Flawless could do it. At that moment, Wu Ming moved according to Flawless' prediction. The armor on Wu Ming's body instantly disintegrated. Without a doubt, Wu Ming was ready to use this invincible shield. However, the next scene made Flawless think that Wu Ming was crazy. After the armor disintegrated, the various parts quickly flew around the Demon God Pillar, surrounding the Demon God Pillar and Wu Ming. Then, every armor part began to connect with each other. A seemingly transparent but incomparable light film appeared, wrapping Wu Ming and the Demon God Pillar Flawless, leaving only the sky. After all, the height of the Demon God Pillar could be said to be so high that one could not see the end. To be more specific, at that moment, an incomparable square barrier with no top covered each of them. It was the kind of invincible light barrier that would not affect the outside world, because the aftermath would reach the sky. If the power was really strong, it could directly break through the atmosphere. There was only one word to describe it, and that was Trapped Beast Deathmatch. I see. Looks like you want to die together with me, Flawless said mockingly. In such a confined space, no matter if Flawless's dark light ball exploded or acted as a light cannon, the end result would be him being injured or even killed. Even with the top as a vent, no, it should be because of this vent that the aftermath of the damage would spread to the Demon God Pillar that reached the sky. Wu Ming smiled. Then I'm sorry. You think too much. Then, Wu Ming waved one hand and a few weapons appeared behind Wu Ming. I just don't want my attack to hurt Tachika. Chapter 542. At that moment, Wu Ming looked like Gilgamesh, who was using the Gate of Babylon. However, the only difference was that the 5 armies were not lined up side by side behind Wu Ming. Dozens of glowing weapons floated around Wu Ming like stars surrounding the moon, wrapping around Wu Ming. There were many types of weapons such as discs, javelins, long sticks, short sticks, trident spears, giant swords, whiplocks, giant hammers, bows and arrows, and so on. Wu Ming waved his hands, and the weapons around him seemed to be pulled as they rotated slowly. Flawless, on the other hand, began to guard against Wu Ming's meaningless attack. What do you mean? Demon God Pillar Flawless's voice sounded a little frightened. Although it was not afraid of Wu Ming's tricks, it had no choice as the sun's incarnation had scared it. After all, the sun was not a trick, but a killer move that could be fatal. In the big hole in Winterwood City, Wu Ming's son made Flawless suffer. In the end, Flawless's body could not take it anymore, so Lev came out to replace it. In the end, Lev was also tortured by Wu Ming's flame until he fainted. After all, Wu Ming's sun incarnation was an inextinguishable flame. Almost nothing could extinguish the sun incarnation that Wu Ming used. You're just bluffing. Don't try to scare me. Flawless roared. Its eyes bulged slightly, and the dark light ball in front of it doubled in size. Although that was what it said, to make Flawless so angry, it was obvious that it had been suppressed. Wu Ming could see through its trick of using anger to cover up its fear. To put it simply, Flawless was actually deceiving itself. Indeed, this body does not have the ability to deal with you, but don't forget about the Holy Grail. As he said that, Wu Ming took out the Holy Grail that he had obtained in Denver from his precious artifact space. Difficult. Flawless recalled the fear of being dominated by the sun. Through the connection between the Demon God Pillars and his own intelligence ability, Flawless naturally knew how Demon God Shudang, who had fused with the Demon God Pillar, died. The sun. With the blessing of the sun god given by Wu Ming through Tamamonome and the Holy Grail as a medium, Wu Ming successfully summoned the sun incarnation. As if expelling all darkness, the incomparably dazzling sunlight illuminated the earth, and the world fell into white. This was the last scene that Floros saw, through demon god Shooting's perspective. Then it was like a broken string, and nothing else could be seen. Floros was very sure that it was the sun that had once ravaged him, but fortunately, it seemed that this move could only be used once. The blessing of the sun god had been completely used up. Since then, I have been paying attention to you. You didn't receive the blessing of the sun god at all. Floros roared. The funny thing was that he could have released his sure-kill dark light ball directly. While Wuming was still talking to Floros, he could have killed Wuming. However, Floros was already terrified. Looking weak on the outside was not scary, but the pain in his heart was fatal. I'm not going to use that move. Just as you said, I don't have the blessing of the sun god as a medium anymore. Wuming smiled and shook his head. However, Wuming's smile was incomparably terrifying in Floros' eyes. With a roar, the dark light ball in front of the demon god pillar exploded instantly, forming a huge dark light beam that swept towards Wuming. However, facing Floros' light beam, Wuming was not nervous at all. Didn't you say that I was scaring you? Then, whether I'm scaring you or not, it's up to you to try it yourself, Floros. As he spoke, the weapons that were emitting golden light around Wuming instantly gathered together and integrated into the holy grail that Wuming was holding. Swoosh, dong. The huge light beam instantly covered Wuming, but the light beam did not stop. Instead, it exploded towards the back and instantly hit the defensive light wall formed by Wuming's noble artifact. There was a huge collision sound. At this moment, a light beam that was extremely small compared to the light beam shot out from the demon god pillar and soared into the sky. Then, the light beam slashed from top to bottom, quickly and fiercely, and Floros' light beam was split apart. After the light beam disappeared, Wuming's figure appeared. Not only was he unscathed, but the holy grail in his hand was also gone. Instead, there was a holy sword that was similar to the Sword of Victory, but more elegant and powerful. What? Floros was horrified. It could not accept and was not willing to accept this result. That's the power of our king. How could you dissolve it so easily? Floros could no longer calm down. That sword, where did it come from? As if all eyes were about to pop out, countless eyes looked at the holy sword in Wuming's hand. I don't need to say anything more to you, Floros. As he spoke, Wuming raised the holy sword in his hand and injected magical power into it. The holy sword erupted with holy thunder and unprecedented light. It was an ultimate power that seemed to be able to split a star. Even the invincible light film formed by the armor could not completely block such power because it was not a damage. Just like that, the power that could split a star seeped outside. In an instant, the ground of the singularity let out a sorrowful cry, and the sky was shrouded by dark clouds. Gadatsi, who felt uneasy, did not want to leave no matter what. She insisted on waiting not far away. She was waiting for the disaster to end, or waiting for the disaster to come. Inside the invincible light film formed by the armor. Damn the dragon of origin. Floros seemed to have known his ending. He was not willing to accept his end and launched an attack. Compared to the beginning, the number and quality of tentacles were one step higher. The heat ray that was comparable to the holy sword and the demon mist that was so dark that it made people tremble were all attacking Wuming. The price that Floros paid for releasing these super powerful attacks was that the entire body of the demon god pillar had shrunk by at least 3 times. At that moment, the demon god pillar was like a bamboo pole that was about to die. However, Wuming did not care about it at all. Before these attacks arrived, Wuming only slashed in the direction of Floros. In an instant, the power that could split a star turned into a light beam that was even bigger than the one released by the demon god pillar. Looking at this power that could definitely destroy Gaia, Floros finally understood why Wuming used the invincible defense to trap them one by one. It was not that he wanted to use the power of the demon god pillar to perish together, But Wu Ming was afraid of hurting this land, this singularity. Floros had no doubt that Wu Ming's move could directly break this singularity. Then, Floros did not know what happened, because the power of the holy sword that could split a star had already covered it. In the outside world, Gadatsi's face was gloomy. Behind her stood a group of followers. Everyone looked nervously at the transparent barrier not far away that was covered in white. Ka Rong raised his head and looked at the light beam that had already rushed out of the sky. He felt the magic power that could break the barrier and let out a sigh of relief. It seems that he is hiding an unimaginable identity. Chapter 543. The reason why Sharon was relieved was because the beam of light was gradually weakening. Because if the intensity just now continued, Sharon believed that this singularity would probably explode. If there was space, the energy would rush out of the atmosphere and enter space. But unfortunately, there was no space here. After all, this was a singularity that was out of human nature. In other words, this was actually an independent subspace. And subspace, there was no universe. In fact, it was because Wu Ming finally thought of this that he gradually weakened the beam of light. Not to mention the servants, Gadatsi and Matthew were doomed. Did they really think that the power of time and space was illusory? As mentioned before, if Wu Ming didn't have the Dragon of Origin's racial talent of time and space, he wouldn't dare to travel through time and space at will. Gem Wu Ming also relied on the records of his existence in each world, and combined with the second law to be able to travel through parallel worlds. And like Rick's world and the world of the Godslayer, there were no records of Gem Wu Ming's existence. This was also one of the reasons why Gem Wu Ming couldn't come to other worlds and could only travel through parallel worlds. Back to the main topic, after Wu Ming destroyed the demon god pillar, the invincible light wall around him automatically disintegrated and turned back into armor on Wu Ming's body. The sky and the earth also returned to their original state, and the mournful cry disappeared. And the place that was originally covered by the invincible light film was now 3 feet underground. It couldn't be helped. Wu Ming's beam of light didn't only extend upward, but also underground. It could be said that if Wu Ming didn't deliberately leave the sky and didn't create a sealed space, the earth would have been penetrated by now. Of course, the result of this singularity was the destruction of the singularity. He didn't care about the hole in the earth that he created. After all, the singularity would automatically repair the place that was different from the original work. Regarding the singularity's automatic repair of everything that happened in the singularity, Wu Ming actually knew about that drawback. Those who were killed by servants would not be resurrected after the singularity was restored. Instead, after the singularity was restored, the world would modify them to be killed by bandits. After all, a person's life and death wasn't something that a mere world could casually interfere with. Or rather, in the eyes of the world, those who were killed were already dead. The only thing that was fixed was the process of being killed. The result wouldn't change. Wu Ming guessed that Gadatsi and the others still didn't know about this. Wu Ming didn't think that Roman would be so heartless to tell them this fact.
It was a sad story.
Immediately after, Wu Ming discovered Gadatsi and the others not far away. Wu Ming flew towards Gadatsi and the others. Assassin. Gadatsi rushed into Wu Ming's arms and hugged Wu Ming's neck with tears in her eyes. Wu Ming was so scared that he could only let go of the holy sword in his hand and let it float beside Wu Ming, while Wu Ming's hands hugged Gadatsi. Ah! Wu Ming gently patted the little girl's back. He was a little confused for a moment. What's going on? At this time, Karen stood up. Master, she has been worried about you, and she doesn't want to leave. Karen laughed helplessly. In fact, when Gadatsi wanted to stay in the beginning, Sharon was opposed to it. After all, even if all their servants died here, they couldn't let Gadatsi get hurt. Just as Karen was about to take Gadatsi away, Matthew took the lead and stood up. I believe in Senpai, and I also believe in Senpai. Karen was stunned by that pair of noble and flawless eyes. Then more servants voted, and the result was that they basically stood on Gadatsi's side. I don't think my friend will lose. I've even lent him all my weapons. It was not easy for me to defeat Hector again. I did not come here to escape. The Apache gods will protect him. I was ordered by that man to protect Tachika. Even if I am a hunter, I will not go back on my words. My husband will be fine, Migu. It was him who woke me up from being influenced by the president's power. I will support him. These were the thoughts of the servants who directly chose to stay, but the servants who indirectly chose to stay were more strange. Shala will stay. I will stay too. Anjan Salma will stay. I will stay too. Edison Salma is also enlightened. In that case, I will stay too. Demon God Pillar is a virus. It needs to be eliminated. So troublesome I have to stay too. Well, I will accompany the ladies. Of course, there were a lot of strange reasons, but it could be said that except for Karen, all the servants directly or indirectly chose to stay with Gadatsi. But what could Karen do? He could not beat up these servants who protected Gadatsi and take away Gadatsi, so he could only stay together. Although he did not believe in Wuming, but as the wise one in the team, he always had to consider the safety of the general. In that case, let's wait here together. In the end, Karen also cast his almost useless vote. Thinking of the vote, just now, Karen felt powerless.
In short, Senpai is very worried about Senpai.
Matthew looked at Gadatsi in Wuming's arms. At this moment, she felt that her senpai was an ordinary little girl. Wuming could only smile helplessly. Then Wuming patted Gadatsi's little head. Have you forgotten that I'm not dead? Even if this spirit base is gone, my body is still intact. However, Gadatsi raised her head from Wuming's arms and looked at Wuming with tears in her eyes. But I am just worried about you. This scene made Kyoheim and Tamamonome show signs of anger, but they were held down by Elizabeth, Helena, and others. You little girl, Wuming didn't know what to say and could only pinch Gadatsi's little nose. Hee, just like the weather in June, Gadatsi's tearful face instantly turned into a smiling face. Holding Gadatsi like this, Wuming began to ask about business. By the way, how far did you push Rome's forces? How did they summon the demon god Pillar directly? Let me answer this question. At this time, a weak voice came. It was no doubt Roman. Roman? Has Chaldea replied already? That's fast. Wuming complained. How can it not be fast?
Da Vinci is exhausted.
At this time, Olga Marie's figure was suddenly projected on the side. Chapter 544. Hey, isn't this Olga? Long time no see. Wuming warmly greeted Olga Marie. Wuming also vaguely saw the poor Roman who was knocked to the ground. Hey, director, you finally came out. Gadatsi was surprised by Olga Marie's appearance. How long have you been in your room? You don't even have a sense of presence. Wuming complained in his heart. While Wuming and Gadatsi were warmly greeting each other, Olga Marie was blushing at the moment. Of course, the blushing was not caused by the greeting between the two. You two guys. How long do you want to hug me? At this time, Wuming realized that he was still hugging Gadatsi. If you didn't say it, I would have forgotten, and Gadatsi also just realized this problem, unhurriedly got down from Wuming's arms. Although the two seemed to be very close, in fact, the relationship between Wuming and Gadatsi was not like what Olga Marie thought. Gadatsi has always regarded Wuming as a reliable person like a brother, not a lover's attachment, and Wuming only regarded Gadatsi as a sister, the kind that was quite doting. In fact, neither Wuming nor Gadatsi realized that since they met, the affection between the two sides was getting deeper and deeper, and this affection was not love or friendship, but kinship and so on. What's wrong with a brother and sister hugging? However, this was not the case for Olga Marie, who didn't know very much. In her eyes, it was just a matter of her subordinate hooking up with her personal servant. Humph. You are my servant. Don't casually contact other masters, Olga Marie said angrily. However, it seemed that the only other master was Gadatsi. Yes, my master Olga Marie, then. Can you tell me what happened? Olga Marie's face was red, and then she began to tell her story. After all, it was not a long story. Olga Marie only spent about 2 minutes to finish it. After Gadazzi and the others met up with Edison, they came here and launched an attack on the Roman side. Of course, after all, it was to cover the action of Wu Ming and others. The servants only made a little move, basically relying on Edison's mechanical infantry to fight with Roman soldiers. However, they didn't see any Roman servants, and the mechanical infantry, with the help of the servants, naturally defeated the Roman soldiers. In the end, they found that there were almost no Roman soldiers coming out of the city. Everyone stopped and began to discuss. Some people proposed to directly enter the city to retrieve the Holy Grail, but more people thought Wu Ming's plan, including Gadazzi. After all, Gadazzi knew that she could use the Holy Grail to summon the demon god Pillar, so she was more worried that Rome would directly summon the demon god Pillar if he was forced into a corner. After this news was told to everyone, those who proposed to directly attack the city were silent. By the way, Olga Marie also supported the attack. When she talked about this matter, her face was red. After all, the demon's pillar was not a joke. If it appeared now, the servants would not be able to stop it. Olga Marie was not here, but Gadazzi was in danger. Just when everyone was ready to retreat, the demon's pillar suddenly appeared in the city and began to destroy the people and things around it. And for some reason, the demon's pillar was like a joke, passively led by everyone. But this was also good. In this way, Gadazzi and others could go and search for survivors. However, from the tentacles that attacked Gadazzi and others, it could be seen that the demon's pillar was indeed playing. It was waiting. And after Wu Ming's arrival, the demon's pillar no longer paid attention to other people's reactions. That person was most likely Wu Ming. Fortunately, the demon's pillar and Wu Ming's conversation was communicated through a special magic transmission. After all, if the demon's pillar really spoke by itself, with its size, the sound was enough to be heard by all the servants here. Although Floros was a demon's pillar, it was not a guy who was willing to let others listen to it. Otherwise, it would have already spoken. Why wait until Wu Ming's arrival to talk to Wu Ming? And Wu Ming, who thought of Floros, looked at Matthew. Matthew. Wu Ming looked at Matthew with some hesitation. Senior, do you have anything else? Matthew looked at Wu Ming. Although it was Wu Ming who spoke first, Wu Ming was silent. Shaking his head, Wu Ming decided to speak. Floros or Lev is a little obsessed with you. Wu Ming's words not only made Matthew stunned, but even the surrounding servants and Gadazzi were puzzled. Wu Ming used his mental power to see Floros' behavior that could be said to be targeting Matthew, coupled with the other party's anger towards Chaldea and Matthew's identity as a test tube baby. Wu Ming could almost guess something. Although no one mentioned Matthew's identity as a test tube baby, Wu Ming's eyesight could still see that Matthew was a little different. Nothing, I'm just guessing, don't mind it. Wu Ming immediately laughed and shook his head. This caused everyone to be confused. But Matthew was thinking about something. It seemed that she had some feelings in her heart. In order to avoid an awkward silence, Achilles spoke. To be able to get rid of that special demon god Pillar, you really are the one who forced me to a dead end, Sodric. Achilles laughed like a bandit and put his arm around Wu Ming's shoulder. Just now when Wu Ming and the demon god Pillar Floros were fighting, Achilles, who defeated Hector, drove his chariot over. However, looking at the injury on his heel, history had probably repeated itself, and Hector had broken his immortality. However, Hector once again repeated history and left the arena after a one-on-one fight with Achilles. Oh no! After being reminded by Achilles, Wu Ming suddenly thought of something. What's wrong? Gadazzi looked at Wu Ming. At this time, Roman's weak voice came. That your holy grail hasn't been recovered yet. Everyone was silent. It seemed to be true, because everyone ignored this matter because of the interaction between Wu Ming and Gadazzi, and Wu Ming just happened to see Gadazzi when he was putting away the armor, and flew down before he had time to recover it. Ahem, I'll go retrieve it now. Wu Ming smiled awkwardly and prepared to fly over. But unfortunately, the place where the demon god Pillar was previously located, which was the current huge pit, suddenly erupted with a pillar of magic energy that soared to the sky.
Ugh.
Wuming covered his head with a headache. This was great, this was bad. Chapter 545. Wuming told Sharon and others to take Gadatsi to the distance. Some of the servants knew that they were not strong, so they spontaneously acted as Gadatsi's guards. There were some who were forced to stay by Gadatsi's side, such as Nightingale. As for the willful Xiaoyu, who wanted to go with Wu Ming, she was dismissed by Wu Ming's words, "A virtuous wife must first be obedient." The remaining servants followed Wu Ming to the giant pit to see the situation. Achilles was driving the chariot, and Wu Ming, Rama, and Sharon were standing on the chariot. Only Atlanta was not weak, but she did not follow them. Wu Ming said, half-jokingly, "We men are enough. Tachika will be taken care of by you women." These words made Robin Hood and Billy Boy blush with shame. But Geronimo did not care about these things. So, Wu Ming, Sharon, and Rama, along with Achilles, sat on his chariot and flew to the center of the giant pit to see the situation. The giant magic pillar that was visible to the naked eye just now was completely gone at this moment. Because of this, they dared to come to the center to see the situation. The reason was quite simple. Being able to withstand fire damage did not mean that they had to bear it when the fire was burning. They could wait for the fire to extinguish before taking action. Wu Ming and others also saw that the magic pillar disappeared and rushed over. However, the disappearance of the magic pillar did not mean that the magic in the giant pit disappeared. Wu Ming and the others could clearly feel the huge source of mana below them. They were certain that the owner of that mana was below them. But because there were still residual magic and dust, and the magic source at the bottom of the giant pit was constantly emitting magic, coupled with the darkness in the pit, everyone could hardly see the bottom. Sharon began to use clairvoyance to carefully look below, but the magic in the giant pit blocked Karen's clairvoyance, so he could not see clearly. This is bad. The other party is at least as strong as Achilles, or even stronger. We can't go down rashly. Although Karen's words made Achilles very unhappy, they were the truth. Achilles could only smack his lips. Rama also frowned. That magic power makes me feel uneasy. It's a feeling of being restrained. Wu Ming's face, on the other hand, did not change in the slightest. Looking at the dark crater below, Wu Ming sensed a familiar power. The master of that power was the servant that Wu Ming had seen before, the destroyer of civilization, Attila, the Hun king. In fact, if he thought about it carefully, it made sense. The other party's noble phantasm was the divine sword of the Roman god of war. It was not strange for him to be related to the Roman forces. Seems like it's an old rival. Achilles, Sharon, Rama, wait for me here. I'll go down myself. The three of them looked at Wu Ming with surprise, but considering Wu Ming's current state, they calmed down. The armor that originally separated from his body was once again attached to his body, leaving only his head exposed. Wu Ming's magic power constantly circulated on the armor, making it look even more holy. Similarly, Wu Ming's holy sword, Divine Blade of Salvation, was once again held in Wu Ming's hand. Pure magic power was also circulating on the sword. Just one strike was enough to make the demon god pillar retreat. The lightning and radiance of this holy sword left an incomparably deep impression on Sharon and the others. It could be said that if Wu Ming said that he could defeat the servant in the giant pit, Sharon and the others would not think that Wu Ming was lying. It could not be helped. The Divine Blade of Salvation was just that powerful. I really did not expect my friend to have such a deep connection with me. My noble phantasm actually drew out your noble phantasm. Rama's face revealed a strange expression. The various types of weapons that were floating around Wu Ming were actually Rama's rarely used noble phantasm, Vishunbuja. It was a noble phantasm that had once received the legendary materialization of the holy god's weapon. It then formed the appearance of Gilgamesh's Gate of Babylon. Of course, unlike Gilgamesh's Gate of Babylon, Rama's weapon did not exceed 50 pieces. It was not realistic to want to use it as a cannon. Moreover, just penetrating Brahmastra was enough for Rama, which was why Rama rarely used this noble phantasm. When he walked out of Demetrius's portal, Wuming borrowed this rarely used noble phantasm from Rama. This was because Wuming needed an insurance that could defeat everything. Since the sun god's blessing and the Holy Grail could draw out one of Wuming's noble phantasm, the sun incarnation, it was not impossible to use the Vishun Bhuja and the Holy Grail to draw out the divine blade of salvation. After all, the divine blade of salvation was the Manchala formation that the gods created for Rama, the last king. Although Rama in this world was not given almost all weapons by the gods, he had a weapon that was given by the holy god. It could be said that Rama's Vishun Bhuja was the divine blade of salvation of the god-slayer world on the other side of the shape moon world. Although the difference in power between the two was not small, it was not a problem to use the Vishun Bhuja as a holy relic to summon the divine blade of salvation that Wuming inherited from the last king. Rama, if it's you, you should be able to feel the power inside, right? As he spoke, Wuming placed the divine blade of salvation in front of his chest. Rama nodded. Because of the connection, Rama could clearly see the Manchala formation in the divine blade of salvation, as well as the endless number of weapons. It was also because of this that Rama took the opportunity to understand some of Wuming's information that outsiders did not know. Although he could not understand most of the information like Stheno and Tamamonome, Rama still understood a lot. Currently, Rama only knew that Wuming defeated the last king Rama in the alternate world and inherited the last king's position to obtain the divine blade of salvation. Although Rama's expression was a little strange after knowing that he was in the alternate world and not a parallel world after all, his alternate world self was indeed a little strange. If that's the case, then I won't say anything more. Sharon gave up on nagging. He could only say that he was used to nagging as a teacher. Tiske, although I'm not happy, if we follow him down, we might become a burden. Achilles was being frank for once. Don't worry, I'll take care of the enemy. With a confident smile, Wuming closed his helmet. His dragon horns emitted a holy cold light under the sun. With a light leap, Wuming flipped over and turned into a silver ray of light, falling into the bottomless pit. Chapter 546. In the giant pit, Wuming felt as if he had fallen into an abyss. Darkness, without light, shrouded him. That's strange. Wuming used his mental power to examine the unfathomable bottom and frowned in thought. With Wuming's flying speed, he should have reached the core of the earth by now. Besides, Wuming speculated that the giant pit was not that deep. This was almost a small world of its own. Could it be an inherent enchantment? Wuming thought as his magical power surged onto the blade of the divine blade of salvation. The divine blade of salvation was still capable of breaking through with brute force. Just then, a ray of light lit up from the bottom of the abyss. The dazzling light instantly covered Wuming. Wuming subconsciously closed his eyes. Then, Wuming felt his feet touching the ground. Wuming opened his eyes and found that everything in front of him had changed. Grassland? After a moment of surprise, Wuming quickly calmed down. Wuming was now standing on a vast grassland. Feeling the breeze brushing his cheeks, the fragrance of the grass at his feet, and the narrow magical power space, Wuming was almost certain that this was an inherent enchantment. After removing the restrictions of the helmet, Wuming's short hair swayed with the breeze. Wuming took 2 steps forward, came to a small mound, and began to investigate. Unfortunately, even so, there was still an endless grassland around, and in the distance. Just then, the sound of horse hooves suddenly came from afar. Wuming looked at the black, in the distance that gradually grew bigger, and his eyes condensed magical power. He saw that the black, that was gradually approaching, was a dark-skinned girl riding a horse. It was the Hun King that Wuming fought, the war god girl Attila. Although the girl was expressionless, Wuming could see a trace of joy in the girl's eyes. She was enjoying the joy of galloping on the prairie, just like a true child of the prairie. Very soon, Attila approached Wuming on her fine horse. Then, as if she couldn't see Wuming, she galloped past Wuming. Wuming looked suspiciously at Attila, who had already left behind him. Then he squatted down and grabbed a handful of green grass. So that's how it is. Wuming stood up and turned to look at the girl who was leaving. He suddenly understood. This place was not purely an inherent barrier. As everyone knew, the inherent enchantment was the manifestation of one's mind, and it was used to influence the world. At this moment, even though the grassland here was also considered a physical object, to be more specific, it was an incomparably clear illusion. Wuming looked at the grass in his hand. The grass had already disappeared like smoke. A scene between a soul image and an inherent barrier. Then, it shouldn't be an inherent barrier that Attila released on her own initiative, right? Looking at Attila, who was gradually turning into a black, Wuming pondered. This is probably Attila's memories from when she was a Hun. Wuming guessed correctly. Just like how servants and masters would dream of each other's experiences, this was Attila's dream. Originally, because Attila was too dangerous, Romulus used the Holy Grail to seal Attila. Because she was sealed by the Holy Grail, Attila had always been in a state of unconsciousness and dreaming. Because the demon god pillar was destroyed and the Holy Grail was not taken away, Attila relied on the Holy Grail to continue dreaming. After all, Attila was also affected, which was why she was in a state of half-awake. The previous demon god pillar had erupted because of this. Of course, Wuming naturally didn't know about this. Wuming guessed that Attila was used as a sacrifice to summon the demon god pillar. Then, after the demon god pillar was destroyed, Attila had this incomplete dream because of the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail made this dream incomplete, and Wuming happened to intrude, seeing the scene of the girl galloping on the grassland. No matter what the reason was, Attila didn't come out of the huge pit because of the dream, but instead stayed in the huge pit. But at this time, the surrounding environment suddenly began to change. As if it was distorted, except for Wuming himself, the space was in chaos. Wuming didn't feel any danger, so he didn't move, calmly waiting. Immediately, the space began to recover, but looking at the color, it shouldn't be a grassland anymore. This time, Wuming's surroundings turned into a narrow stone room. This narrowness was naturally not from his perspective, but from the girl who occupied most of the space in this stone room. The huge white-haired girl was lying on a stone bed in the middle of the stone room, with a smile on her face as she fell into a deep sleep. Although the stone room was narrow, it was just enough for this giant girl to sleep, so it didn't seem too crowded. Thus, Wuming had enough space to stand. The smiling giant girl sleeping was Attila. Wuming, on the other hand, didn't have any thoughts of Attila that three-nothingness actually knows how to smile. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that this enormous Attila wasn't the girl who had galloped on the grassland just now. The two were definitely related, just like how Wuming used his dependents to create a clone. But a clone was a clone and couldn't become Wuming's main body. Wuming felt that the giant girl in front of him and Attila the Hun had a relationship similar to that of a main body and a clone. At this time, the eyelids of the giant girl lying on the stone bed moved. In the next second, the girl opened her eyes. The giant girl sat up slowly, showing a sitting posture of a young girl. Wuming and the giant girl didn't speak. Both of them stared at each other calmly. However, Wuming saw joy in the giant girl's eyes. Wuming could see that it was the joy of someone finally came or no longer alone. In this way, Wuming would be able to know a little. Even if the giant girl had been sleeping in this stone room for a long time, "If you don't say anything, I'm going to leave," Wuming suddenly said. Wait a minute." The giant girl's gentle voice came, as if she was afraid of scaring Wuming. But even so, Wuming could hear the anxiety and worry in the girl's voice. Wuming smiled. "Don't worry, I'm just kidding." After hearing Wuming's words, the giant girl breathed a sigh of relief. Then, as if she had been enlightened, the giant girl realized that she had been fooled. She looked at Wuming with her small face, if she had a normal body shape. However, Wuming still didn't see anger, resentment, or any other negative emotions in her eyes. Her eyes were still filled with joy and surprise. Sorry, I apologize. It's my fault. Wuming smiled and apologized to the giant girl. It's nothing. Actually, as the master, I should have spoken first. As if she thought of something, the giant girl lowered her head and stopped looking at Wuming. There was a trace of fear in her eyes. It was nothing else but the fear that others might be afraid of her. Wuming's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. Then he smiled.
Who do you think I am?
Something that can make me afraid hasn't been born yet. Then, under the giant girl's surprised gaze, Wuming walked to the giant girl's lap and sat down cross-legged. Chapter 547. The giant girl was quite surprised by Wuming's bold behavior, but she didn't chase away Wuming, who was sitting on her lap. Instead, she lowered her head and talked to Wuming. Wuming told Attila his name, and Attila also told her name. However, Wuming was quite familiar with this girl. At least, he knew her name long ago, because Wuming had seen this giant girl in the origin of the M-shaped moon world. The Star Scout, the destroyer of civilization, the giant god Attila. This explained why Wuming said to Attila to dream peacefully back in Winterwood City. But Wuming always felt that the name Attila wasn't her real name. After all, this name was the same as the Hun King. Or was the Hun King's name based on Attila's name? Both are possible. But it didn't matter. A name was just a code name. Wuming had many names, such as Vilo, Sodlek, Hyunryong, and Selander. Although there was a name that wasn't really a name. Ahem. If it weren't for the fact that Wuming was his original name, Wuming wouldn't have chosen this name as his real name. After all, to the root of origins, dragons, names, and whatnot meant nothing. Just like that, Wuming and Attila chatted like a pair of close friends. They got a lot of information from Wuming, or rather it was Attila who took the initiative to tell Wuming. After all, although Wuming had once soaked in the origin of the M-shaped moon world, Wuming didn't use the origin to investigate the information of the M-shaped moon world. Naturally, he wasn't very clear about Attila's situation. This stone room was actually the control room of a spaceship in the core of the moon. Attila's stone bed was the control panel, and Attila herself was the control lever. However, she couldn't activate the spaceship because she was trapped in this place. Although Attila didn't care much about her personal freedom, she still couldn't activate the spaceship. As for why Wuming was here, it was because of Attila. Attila was actually an avatar of Attila on Earth. Under normal circumstances, if Attila fell asleep, he would be dreaming of Attila or dreaming of other dreams. By the way, do you remember the last time we met in Winterwood City? Wuming asked curiously. Of course I remember. After all, that was the first time someone cared about me. Attila said with a happy smile on his face. Attila's reply stunned Wuming. Just a simple conversation triggered by knowing a little about Attila's situation made Attila so happy that someone cared about her. How lonely would she have to be to say something like that? That was 14,000 years of loneliness. How did Attila, who had gained sentient personality, endure it? It was just a dream. Apart from the few times when he dreamt of Attila the heroic spirit, he dreamt more of what Wuming saw just now. Galloping freely on the endless grassland, without restraint, without harm. Feeling a slightly sad atmosphere in the stone room, Attila quickly changed the topic and began to talk about Attila's singularity in the United States. Because the Magic King sent a new Holy Grail, along with Romulus link summoning, many servants who were more or less related to Rome were summoned, including Attila, the Hun who held the war god's Sword of Mars. And because of Attila's reluctance to destroy and Romulus's fear, before she was fully summoned, she was detected by Romulus and sealed with the Holy Grail. Of course, if Attila resisted, she could have broken free at the beginning of the seal, but Attila, or Attila's heart, didn't want to destroy it. Attila's identity was an alien cosmic destruction weapon that destroyed planets. She was originally emotionless. But because Attila would absorb the technology, knowledge, and civilization of the destroyed planets, the result was that she became quite gentle, tolerant, and pure. Obviously, the civilization of the last planet that Attila destroyed must be an intellectual system full of motherhood and love. In the beginning of the conversation with Attila, Wuming felt that Attila was a lively girl full of excitement. But after chatting for a long time, Wuming felt that Attila was a gentle woman full of motherhood and the calmness and tolerance of an elder. It felt like she had multiple personalities. In fact, Wuming's guess was not wrong. According to Attila herself, she had 3 personalities, but these 3 personalities were not mixed. Instead, they were clearly independent of each other. At the beginning, there was the side of a young girl, the side of an intellectual, motherly, and tolerant goddess, and the side of a follower, or heroic spirit, Attila, a cold and fearsome warrior side. This was why Wuming could immediately feel that Attila had multiple personalities. Attila's personalities were clearly separated and were relatively easy to distinguish. It could be said that Attila the giant had the calmness and tolerance of an elder, the illusory and loneliness of a lonely position, and the calmness and coldness of an invader. However, these personalities would change according to the people or things that she faced. Just like Attila, who was frightened at the beginning, that was the delicate and cute side of a young girl. After interacting with Wuming for a while, Attila showed the motherly, intellectual, gentle, and tolerant side of a goddess. As for the warrior side of Attila, it would basically no longer appear in her original body. It would only appear in Attila as a heroic spirit. Afterwards, Wuming asked how he came here. "Actually, I pulled your spiritual body here," Attila said with some embarrassment. Her current shy appearance should be that of a young girl. According to Attila, when Attila was sealed by the Holy Grail and brought into the demon god Pillar's body, the seal was still stable. Attila used Attila's identity to dream of galloping on the grasslands. Afterwards, when Wuming got rid of the demon god Pillar, the powerful force destroyed part of the Holy Grail's seal on Attila. As a result, it created a strange area under the huge crater that was neither an environment nor an inherent barrier. It was in between the two. And Wuming just happened to enter Attila's dream. Attila was indeed unable to discover Wuming's existence, but Attila did. Therefore, Attila directly used the Holy Grail and that special area to pull Wuming's spiritual body to the spaceship in the center of the moon. According to Attila, it was like this. "Because Wuming, you have been releasing your spiritual power roughly. I thought you were asking me to pull you here." Attila had a careful expression on her face. She was afraid of making Wuming unhappy. Wuming smiled helplessly. It turned out that his spiritual power that was only used for investigation had become a burden. He had to train it properly in the future. And at this time, Wuming thought of something. "My use of spiritual power is rough. Does Attila have any methods to help train spiritual power?" Immediately, Attila nodded. Wuming smiled. This was like a pillow when he was sleepy. Chapter 548. According to Attila, the previous civilization she destroyed was actually a civilization that developed spiritual power. This was in line with the development of the intellectual system that was full of motherhood and love. After all, people with gentle hearts often had strong spiritual power. He had never seen Attila use such power before, but that was only because spiritual power was useless to her, which was why she almost didn't use it. After all, the giant god was an existence that used brute force to break through technique, so why would he bother with those empty things? Following that, with Attila's rough guidance, Wuming easily learned the use of spiritual power and other branches of it. For example, telekinesis now. "Wah!" Attila shouted in a panic because she had left the stone bed and was floating in the stone room. Even so, the stone room didn't seem crowded, as if it could adjust the internal space according to Attila. "I see. The use of spiritual power is so simple," Wuming said with a smile as he looked at Attila, who was floating in the air under his telekinesis playfully. Then, Attila felt as if a pair of hands were touching her skin. She knew that it was Wuming's telekinesis. Although she didn't hate it, she didn't like it when invisible things were messing around on her skin. Because Wuming, your spiritual power is already very strong, and if you don't keep training your spiritual power, even if it's a very crude method to persist, it's still strengthened a lot. It's just that Wuming doesn't know how to use it. Even without me, you could have developed to this extent on your own. Attila blushed and stuttered. Attila was right. Wuming would take some time to meditate every day, but Wuming's initial meditation was just to maintain his sense of self. The root dragon had no lifespan limit, and this way, Wuming used meditation to stabilize his youthful heart so that his mentality wouldn't age with age. This was also why Wuming, who was almost 100 years old, still had the mindset of a young man and did not have the attitude of an old man at all. Of course, this was the age for ordinary people. After all, 100 years old was a complete underage age for the origin dragon, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it a baby. However, Wuming's meditation also produced side products, which were the development of mental strength and the purification of mana. Mental power was something that could not be touched. The mental power of the origin dragon, no, it should be said that it had no shortcomings in any aspect. Therefore, Wuming was able to develop mental power during meditation, and it was a very strong mental power developed through rough methods. It couldn't be helped. After all, consolidating a young heart was the main theme of Wuming. It was already very good that the spiritual power of a byproduct could reach such a level. No, it should be said that for the origin dragon, such an outcome was normal. The second point was mana purification. As the root dragon, Wuming had almost unlimited mana. However, almost unlimited and infinite were two different things. In other words, Wuming's mana would also be used up. In this way, there were two solutions. One was to find a way to obtain unlimited mana, and the other was to purify the mana. Wuming didn't consider the first point and chose the second one instead, because in Wuming's opinion, purification of mana was especially important. For example, a relic that required 100 points of mana to release could be released with only 10 points of mana after purification. This effect of getting twice the result with half the effort was what Wuming liked to pursue. Wuming didn't think that there was truly unlimited mana. The so-called unlimited mana was just the fact that the recovery speed of mana was faster than the consumption, which created the illusion of unlimited mana. However, that was only Wuming's guess. Since Wuming had doubts about it, he wouldn't choose that path. Instead, he chose to purify mana. Wuming's current mana had never been used up. At most, he only used half of it, and that was when he dealt with the last king, Rama. Even then, Wuming still won. After defeating the last king, he also gained a lot of benefits, which made Wuming even stronger. Therefore, in Wuming's opinion, the mana he had was enough. What he needed to do was to improve the quality of the mana. Just like what was mentioned above, a relic that required 100 points of mana to release could be released with only 10 points of mana after purification. What a surprising result! With continuous purification in the future, it might even change from 10 points of mana to 1 point, or even 0 points of mana. Therefore, Wuming valued quality and not quantity. In summary, Wuming felt that Attila's words were right. However, Wuming didn't agree with some of Attila's words. Wuming knew himself well. At most, Wuming would only use his mental strength to search for enemies. Moreover, he would only use it in such a simple and crude way. This was because Wuming didn't want to develop in that direction. Not to mention that Wuming had mastered the Lune magic, which was rare even in the Type Moon world. He had also mastered all the magic of the Yggdrasil world tree. Although Wuming didn't master many magic spells, after all, he had the nameless spellbook, which was why Wuming was lazy. However, the fact that he could use it wouldn't change. Putting aside the martial arts that he had learned from Skaha, apart from magic and magic, Wuming's killer move was the god's authority that he had obtained by killing a god. Wuming only had a total of 3 authorities: the 12 clones, the Savior Divine Sword, and Lingjuzi. Due to Wuming's influence, the 12 clones had combined the powers of 2 gods. In addition to the origin baptism, they were the authorities of 12 worlds. They were extremely powerful. The Savior Divine Sword was the divine weapon that Wuming had obtained after defeating the last king, Rama, who had killed the God-slayers. Apart from that, the Savior Divine Sword contained the reward that the gods had given to the last king for killing the demon king. It was the Manchala formation that contained almost all of the gods' god relics. The Savior Divine Sword was comparable to an EX-level relic and separated into the Manchala formation that contained almost all of the gods' god relics. One could say that it was an alternative gate of Babylon. Moreover, the Savior Divine Sword had been baptized by the Origin Baptism. It was no longer an ordinary item and had evolved to a higher level. As for Ling Zhuzi, Wuming had not used it for a long time. After all, Nez's ability was not considered powerful. He was only used as a demonic servant. Therefore, Wuming released Neza when he left the world of the God-slayers. Wuming had reminded Neza not to cause any trouble again and again. However, Wuming thought it was unbearable. However, he would not care as long as nothing serious happened. Wuming was the Lord Demon King who had saved that world. He had even defeated the last king. Wuming believed that nobody would disrespect him. All in all, Wuming's origin dragon was powerful. Although he had used a weakened servant body many times, Wuming did not pay too much attention to his spirit. Because even if it was the body of a servant, it was still powerful enough. However, now that he had the guidance of a master, Wuming would definitely obtain new skills with half the effort. As a result, as Attila said, Wuming learned very quickly. He stopped teasing Attila and gently put Attila down with his telekinesis. Wuming used his telekinesis to lift himself up and reach the state of flight. Although Wuming could use mana jet and acceleration to achieve the effect of flight, it was easier to fly with his spirit. After all, Wuming had extremely powerful spirit. With just a thought, he could fly without any difficulty. Attila, it's all thanks to you that I can learn so quickly. Wuming's words made Attila, whose cheeks were still red, shake his head. Didn't I say that even without me, you can still do it? If that's the case, then I won't say thank you. After all, there's no need to say thank you between real friends. Facing Attila's strength, Wuming could only admit defeat. However, Attila was stunned by Wuming's words. Friends, huh? At this moment, Attila had an urge to cry. Chapter 549. Obviously, Wuming had underestimated Attila's obsession with the word friend. As a result, Attila shed tears of joy in front of Wuming. Although Wuming could tell that Attila was happy, Wuming could only pretend that he did not know. He then began to apologize to make Attila laugh. After all, Wuming sympathized with Attila, who had been alone for 14,000 years. However, Attila did not need sympathy. If he sympathized with her, it would be an insult to her. No, it should be said that for anyone who could survive 14,000 years alone and still maintain a gentle character, sympathizing with her was equivalent to insulting her. Therefore, Wuming would not sympathize with her. He would only bring her happiness as a friend. As expected, Wuming is very gentle. Although Attila said that he wasn't a fool, Attila had already felt that she was thinking for him. Wuming smiled helplessly. As no one had ever treated Attila this way, the warmth that Wuming brought to her made her feel extremely gentle. Wuming did not think that he was gentle. It was just a necessary concern for a friend. Even if he was really gentle, he would only have feelings for the people he cared about, such as Mayu and the rest. To Attila, who was a stranger not long ago, Wuming was not gentle at all. Although he was sorry, it was the truth. However, Wuming believed that as time passed, Wuming would be able to treat Attila like how he treated Mayu and the rest. Wuming was just trying his best to talk to her and bring Attila more new things. Without thinking about it, Wuming said to Attila, as it was almost time. It's almost time for me to go. After all, Wuming had not completed what he needed to do in the Singularity in the United States. The Celtic Holy Grail was still in Maeve's hands, and he had to get it. Moreover, there was still a Holy Grail in Wuming's relic space. Wuming still had to give it to Chaldea. As for the other Holy Grail, sorry, Wu Ming's sword of salvation was the carrier of that holy grail. After Wu Ming finished speaking, Attila looked slightly lonely. Because I pulled your spiritual body here, the flow rate here is completely different from that singularity. Attila blushed and stuttered as she was afraid that she would anger Wu Ming. When Attila said this, how could Wu Ming not know? Attila just wanted him to stay a little longer and accompany her more. Wu Ming wasn't angry, or rather, it should be said that he shouldn't be angry. After being stunned for a while, Wu Ming smiled. If that's the case, I'll take a break here. After all, this is a rare opportunity to slack off. As Wu Ming spoke, he flew to Attila's lap and lay down again. Attila was not as surprised as she was last time. Instead, she smiled happily. Just like that, Wu Ming and Attila started chatting in the stone room. Although it was called chatting, it was basically Wu Ming talking about his own experiences. Attila was listening, and she would complain about Wu Ming from time to time. Then, she would be teased by Wu Ming. When she realized what was going on, both of them laughed. Then, Wu Ming continued. Attila was lonely. She did not ask for anyone to talk to her. However, she felt very happy to have someone tell her stories. Moreover, this was Wu Ming's story. Attila was very interested in this first friend of hers. After some time, both of them were still in the same mode. One of them was talking and the other was listening. Suddenly, a hesitant look appeared on Attila's face. Did something happen? Wu Ming immediately noticed Attila's abnormality and asked patiently. It's almost time, Attila said with a hint of sadness in his voice. Wu Ming had a rough idea of the time he was referring to when it was almost time. It was almost time for Wu Ming's spiritual body to disappear. It made sense. Even if the flow of time here was very different from the other side, it was impossible for Wu Ming to stay here forever. After all, Wu Ming was now a spiritual body. But this was also good. After all, Wu Ming's matter at the singularity was not settled yet. Wu Ming looked at his faintly discernible body, as well as Attila's happy yet lonely eyes, and asked solemnly, Attila, do you want to go to the outside world? Go to the outside world to see? Attila obviously did not think about this. She was a weapon left behind. Her only purpose was to wait and dream. At least that was the case for now. Wu Ming read Attila's thoughts as a weapon from her eyes. I don't think a creature with such gentle emotions is a weapon. If that's the case, then this world is too cruel to you. With that said, Wu Ming subconsciously touched his arm as if he was touching something. Wu Ming thought of Enkidu, who willingly followed him. Back then, Wu Ming did not have the ability to fight against the gods, so he could only retreat strategically. Enkidu's soul willingly turned into Heavenlock and followed Wu Ming. Although Enkidu kept saying that she was a weapon and eventually turned into a weapon, even so, Wu Ming did not think a person with such gentle emotions was a weapon. Even if she was once a weapon and now turned back into a weapon. This principle was the same for Attila. These emotions are just remnants of the previous civilization. I don't have any emotions. With that said, Attila showed a self-deprecating and lonely expression. She slowly lowered her head. I'm just a weapon. I'm the vanguard of the stars, Attila the giant god. Attila lowered her head more and more as she spoke, and her tone became weaker. In the end, Wu Ming could not hear what Attila was saying anymore. Attila was almost burying her head in her chest. Although Attila did not have a chest, cough cough, Wu Ming heard fear in Attila's words. Attila was afraid that Wu Ming would give up on her because of her identity as a weapon. This would cause Attila to lose her only friend. Aren't you looking down on me too much? Wu Ming pretended to be angry. He used his telekinesis to fly up and level with Attila's head. He then used his telekinesis to lift Attila's head. If you think your feelings are so cheap, then I'm really going to be angry. Attila stared at Wu Ming with her big eyes. She did not say anything. Although I've just gotten to know you, Attila, I don't think your feelings are fake. If that's the case, what about our friendship? Wu Ming's words left Attila speechless and dumbfounded. I don't think our feelings are fake. Friendship is not judged by the length of time. Even if it's a short relationship, I think it's your true feelings. Wu-ming said to Attila word by word seriously. Remember, as long as you want freedom, I'll definitely help you. With my original body's ability, I'll definitely be able to free you from here. Wu-ming looked at Attila with firm eyes without a trace of deceit. He spoke his thoughts word by word. Wu-ming did not think that Attila would use her own will to destroy him after being freed because Attila already had feelings. It was a feeling that was both gentle and pure, strong and tolerant. Wu-ming felt that such Attila was qualified to live in the outside world. Wu-ming. Attila did not know what to say for a moment. Of course, if you're not satisfied, I'll personally capture those wandering stars and let them liberate you and give you freedom. Wu-ming said confidently, giving Attila a feeling of, as long as it's him, I'll definitely be able to do it. As the root dragon, Wu-ming naturally had that kind of ability. It was quite difficult now, but when Wu-ming became an adult, it would be very easy. I swear on my identity as the root dragon that as long as you don't give up, our friendship will always exist. Although this was not good for the civilizations that Attila destroyed, the dead were gone. Wu-ming believed that if those good civilizations were still alive, they would definitely forgive such an innocent girl. As for the opinions of those bad civilizations, sorry, so be it if they were destroyed. Thank you, my friend. Attila held Wu-ming in front of her with both hands. Tears flowed down from the corner of her eyes as she smiled happily. Chapter 550. Fifth Singularity, America Continent, a crater near Alexandria. Achilles was driving the chariot, pacing back and forth near the crater, looking extremely frustrated. Sharon and Rama on the chariot were also frowning, but they did not dare to act rashly. Because it was too strange, there was no movement from the bottom of the crater. It had been a few minutes since Wu-ming went down. Although they thought that even Wu-ming would not be able to finish the battle in a few minutes, it was too strange that there was no movement at all. Just then, in their magic perception, the magic power in the crater dissipated. Did we win? Ka Rong used his all-seeing eyes and looked down at the area that had become clear. Then, Sharon saw a black shadow flying toward the top of the crater, but Sharon still could not see who it was. Get ready. Sharon raised his bow. Achilles and Rama nodded their heads and took out their weapons. After all, it would be bad if it was not Wu-ming but an enemy. First, it would mean that Wu-ming had been defeated, and it was unknown whether he was alive or dead. Second, if even Wu-ming could not defeat an enemy, it would be a dead end for them. As time passed, the figure came up. Fortunately, it was Wu-ming, and not an enemy they had never seen before. It's my friend. Looks like he succeeded. Rama looked at the golden cup in Wu-ming's hand and sighed in relief. Why is he carrying a woman up here? Could it be that the strong enemy below is this woman? Achilles also saw the Holy Grail in Wu-ming's hand, but his eyes were sharper. At the same time, he also saw the girl in the same wedding dress as Wu-ming in Wu-ming's arms. At first, Achilles did not see it. After all, both of them were wearing white, and it was too dazzling to see them together. If it were not for the girl's golden hair dancing with the wind, Achilles would have to wait until Wu-ming got closer to see her. Then, Sharon, who was still observing with his eyes wide open, noticed something and immediately cried out. Wait, what else is coming up? Just as Karong finished speaking, a white figure suddenly charged out from behind Wu-ming, or perhaps beneath him, from the giant pit. Dong! The white figure jumped onto the ground at the edge of the crater, stirring up a thick cloud of dust. Soon after, the dust settled and the newcomer appeared before the eyes of Ka Rong and the rest. It was a white-haired girl. Most of her skin was exposed in her revealing white ethnic attire. Her tan skin was in a healthy state, and she held a tricolored sword in her hand. Her eyes were filled with a strong desire to destroy as she stared at Sharon and the other two. This person was very dangerous. Be it Sharon, Achilles, or Rama, all of them had the same thought. At this moment, Wu-ming also flew up. Wu-ming used his telekinesis to control his body and gently landed beside the white-haired girl. Attila, calm down, Wu-ming gently said to the white-haired girl. After hearing Wuming's words, the white-haired girl nodded without hesitation. The desire in her eyes dissipated, replaced by a dazed look. As for why Attila was so obedient to Wuming, it was because this was a gift from Attila to Wuming, a friend. "I can't help you now, so I'll let my clone, my dream, help you," Attila said before Wuming disappeared. Then, Wuming realized that he had obtained a slave who was completely obedient to his orders. Thinking of this, Wuming's face showed a speechless expression. So the so-called help was completely obedient to his orders. Wasn't this the same as a weapon? Not noticing Wuming's subtle expression, after seeing that Attila was no longer a threat, Achilles and Sharon looked at each other and landed. "What's going on? What happened to you down there?" Sharon walked down from the chariot and came before Wuming, asking in confusion. He could also see that the white-haired girl was no longer an enemy, but the powerful pressure just now still made Sharon worried. Achilles and Rama felt the same. It was as if they were facing their natural enemy. "It's like this." Wuming looked at Attila, then put the unconscious blonde girl in wedding dress into Achilles' chariot, and at the same time, placed the Holy Grail in the girl's arms, then began to explain. Wuming told Sharon and the others about how he accidentally entered the incomplete inherent enchantment created by the Holy Grail. Wuming did not tell Sharon and the others about his dreamlike trip to the moon's spaceship and his encounter with Attila. It was not that Wuming did not believe that Sharon and the others could not keep a secret, but this matter was not suitable to be told to outsiders. After all, Wandering Star, Giant God, 14,000 years, and so on were too mysterious and complicated. It was better to tell a little lie. "This is the Hun King Attila, an old acquaintance and good friend of mine." Then, Wuming explained the origin of Attila in a half-true, half-false manner. Due to Attila's strong desire to destroy, she was sealed by the holder of the Holy Grail in Rome, trapped in the Holy Grail. Due to the appearance and death of the demon god Pillar, Attila's seal was broken, and the magic pillar visible to the naked eye just now was Attila releasing the seal, and entering the incomplete inherent enchantment was also Attila's dream. In any case, Achilles and Rama believed that she was sealed, just like Berserker's desire to destroy. It made them feel like they were facing a great enemy. The golden-haired girl lying on Achilles' chariot was the sacrifice summoned by the demon god Pillar. After the demon god Pillar was destroyed, the girl reappeared. Because she had the support of the Holy Grail by her side, she did not disappear due to excessive weakness. After that, Wuming brought the blonde girl with the Holy Grail out of the huge pit with Attila. Because Attila used the method of jumping, she reached the ground one step faster than Wuming, who flew up. In short, everything is over. Sharon no longer paid attention to the loopholes in Wuming's words, giving Wuming enough face. After all, Wuming was not good at lying. Even if Achilles and Rama were fooled, as a teacher, Sharon was not fooled, and Teacher Ma was not that naive. Indeed, now that we have the Holy Grail in Maeve's hands, this singularity can be fixed. The four of them heaved a sigh of relief. This singularity was finally over. Let's go back to Tachika's side. Achilles drove the chariot, carrying Sharon and Rama, while Wuming and Attila walked on the ground. According to Wuming's words, "I want to chat with an old friend." But in reality, Wuming was afraid that Attila would not be used to riding Achilles' chariot, so Wuming felt that it would be better to walk with Attila. And at this moment, a huge amount of magic suddenly condensed in the sky, and a huge circle embedded in the sky appeared in everyone's vision. Immediately, the circle exploded with a powerful magic, and a beam of light descended from the sky, presumably landing at Tachika's place. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.